What if beneath the streets you walk every day an entire civilization is still waiting to be discovered? Hidden beneath towering buildings, busy roads and modern cities lie the forgotten remains of people whose names, stories and achievements have almost vanished from history. Tonight we'll uncover the astonishing evidence buried just below our feet and reveal why some of humanity's greatest civilizations disappeared without a trace. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another journey into history's greatest mysteries. Now let's dig beneath the modern world and uncover what time tried to hide. The street looks ordinary until the ground opens. Above it, traffic moves in bright lines. Shoes cross painted lanes. A delivery van waits at a corner. Rainwater slides along the curb and disappears through a drain without ceremony, as if the city has always known exactly where the water should go. Glass offices stand beside old stone facades. Cafes push warm air into the morning. People hurry over the pavement with the private certainty of those who believe the world beneath their feet is solid, modern, and known. Then a construction crew cuts through the asphalt, the machine teeth bite into layers of gravel and brick dust, and suddenly the present is no longer the surface of history. It is only the last thin skin. At first the workers expect the usual complications: a pipe where no pipe should be, a forgotten cable, a cellar wall from some demolished 19th century building. Modern cities are full of such annoyances, and engineers have a practical way of speaking about the past when it blocks a schedule. But this wall is different. It lies too deep, built from stone blocks no recent contractor would have used, aligned at an angle that does not match the street above. Nearby, under a crust of compacted earth, there is a fragment of pavement worn smooth by feet that vanished long before the city became the city printed on maps. A few more careful strokes reveal pottery, then bone, then a dark line of ash. The work slows. Voices lower. Someone calls the municipal archaeologist. This is how forgotten civilizations often return, not as legends rising from desert sands, but as interruptions in paperwork. They emerge under parking garages, subway stations, apartment foundations, sewer trenches and office towers. They appear in the places least designed for wonder, beneath traffic cones and steel barriers, while modern life complains about delays overhead. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the most unsettling thing about a buried civilization under modern streets is not that it disappeared. It is that people kept living directly above it generation after generation until the vanished world became part of the ground itself. The city in this story is not one place only. It belongs to Rome beneath Rome, where ancient apartments and imperial walls sleep below churches, shops and apartment blocks. It belongs to London, where Roman Londinium lies beneath financial towers and railway stations. It belongs to Istanbul, where Byzantine cisterns, forums, harbours, and walls remain folded into a city that has changed names, empires, languages, and faiths. It belongs to Mexico City, built over the island capital of Tenochtitlan, where temples and causeways still press against the foundations of colonial and modern streets. It belongs to Paris above Lutetia, Naples above Greek and Roman chambers, York above Roman and Viking layers, and countless smaller places where the past is not a ruin outside the city but the city's buried skeleton. Yet the phrase buried under modern streets can make the past sound passive, as if an ancient people simply vanished and waited in silence. The truth is more complicated. Cities bury themselves. They rise by accident and necessity. A house collapses and its rubble becomes a platform. A fire destroys a district and builders level the blackened debris rather than carry it away. A flood lays down silt. A road becomes muddy, then is paved over again. A temple is stripped for stone. A wall becomes a foundation. A cellar becomes a dump. A ditch fills with broken pottery bones, ash, and household waste. Centuries compress into a vertical archive, and the living keep stepping upward, rarely noticing that their own floors are slowly becoming someone else's underground. What makes this mystery so powerful is the strange closeness of it. Many lost civilizations are imagined at a distance, hidden beyond deserts, forests, mountains, or oceans. But the buried city under modern streets is intimate. It waits beneath familiar places. Its people cooked, traded, prayed, repaired shoes, argued over prices, buried, children patched roofs, sharpened blades, and watched weather change over walls that no longer rise above the surface. They were not trying to become mysterious. They were trying to live. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record suggests a world both recognizable and unreachable, a civilization close enough to touch in a trench, yet distant enough that its full name language, fears and ambitions may never return whole. A modern street can hide astonishing depth. Beneath the painted asphalt may be concrete. Beneath the concrete, crushed stone. Beneath that, an old roadway laid in cobbles, then an earlier lane of packed gravel, then a drain made of brick, then a Roman street, then a pre-Roman track marked only by compacted soil. In some cities, archaeologists speak of meters of accumulation, not because one single catastrophe buried everything, but because life itself leaves weight. Dust falls, roof tiles break, fires happen, markets leave refuse, walls are demolished and rebuilt. The dead are moved, forgotten, or built around. Even cleaning creates layers because what is swept away must go somewhere. The tidy surface of a city is often balanced on centuries of discarded solutions. Under the street, time also loses its simple order. A medieval well may cut through a Roman floor. A modern pipe may slice across an ancient burial. A basement wall may reuse stones from a temple whose original purpose was already forgotten when the wall was built. A subway tunnel may pass within a few feet of a bathhouse, a cemetery, or a harbour that no longer meets the water. The ground is not a neat stack of pages. It is torn, edited, burned, patched, and overwritten. Scholars still debate many buried urban landscapes, because the evidence is often damaged by the very continuity that makes them fascinating. A city abandoned in a desert may preserve its outline cleanly. A city that never stopped living preserves the past badly but deeply. The first clue is often not a treasure but a mismatch. A street that bends for no visible reason. A property line that preserves the curve of a vanished wall. A church built at a strange angle because its foundation sits on older masonry. A neighbourhood name that remembers a gate, a market, a field, or a shrine no one can see. These survivals are quiet, but they matter. Modern citizens may believe they are navigating a planned city of boulevards and blocks, while their movements still follow decisions made by people whose buildings were swallowed centuries ago. The buried civilization is not only under the street. Sometimes it is inside the street's shape. This is where the story begins, not with a single lost city waiting to be dramatically uncovered, but with a deeper question about urban memory. How does a civilization become invisible while its stones remain in use? How can a city forget the people who built its first roads, controlled its first water, raised its first public buildings, and laid out the paths still followed by strangers thousands of years later? No single explanation fully accounts for this. Some cities are buried by disaster, others by conquest, others by prosperity, and many by the slow practical decisions of people with no desire to preserve what came before. History is not always erased by violence. Sometimes it is erased by construction. Imagine the modern pavement removed like a lid. Beneath it, the city changes colour. The grey-black surface gives way to pale mortar, red tile, yellow clay, charcoal streaks, greenish metal, and the dull cream of bone. A room appears though only the lower stones survive. A threshold still holds the groove where a door once turned. A drain slopes toward a street that has not seen daylight in centuries. In one corner lies a broken vessel, not precious, not rare, only abandoned at the moment it ceased to be useful. That small object may outlast kings, banners, currencies, and entire official histories. It does not explain the civilization by itself, but it insists that someone was here. Above, the traffic continues. The cafe opens. A pedestrian steps around the fenced excavation and glances down for less than a second. The city is impatient with its own depths. Yet below that fence the old world begins to gather itself again, not whole, never whole, but enough to disturb the modern illusion that the present owns the ground. The forgotten civilization has not risen. The modern city has simply looked down. Long before the modern avenue exists, before the traffic lights and shop signs, before the pipes and cables, before the foundations of towers press their weight into the older earth, the place begins with simpler attractions. Water is close. The ground is slightly raised. The soil can be worked. A route passes nearby, perhaps no more than a track at first, worn by feet, hooves, sledges and carts. There is shelter from wind, a view across lower land, a ford where a river can be crossed, or a bend where boats can be pulled to the bank. The first settlement is not born because someone imagines a future metropolis. It begins because the landscape offers a bargain. The earliest people who settle there likely know the place by features rather than by a name that survives. A muddy bank where reeds grow thick, a low ridge that stays dry when floods spread through the valley, a spring that keeps running through summer, a slope where smoke rises cleanly from hearths. These details matter more than monuments. Archaeologists often find that beneath the proud stone layers of later cities lie traces that seem almost fragile post holes, pits, packed floors, fragments of handmade pottery, animal bones split for marrow-burnt seeds, stone tools and ditches whose original purpose remains debated. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is enough to show that the Great Buried City usually begins as a negotiation with water-food movement and danger. Water is almost always central. A river gives fish reeds clay transport and a moving boundary between known and unknown land. It also brings risk. Rivers flood, change course, silt, up undermine banks, and leave behind layers of mud that can preserve or destroy human traces. A settlement beside water must learn rhythm. People place houses where ground stays firm. They store grain where damp cannot easily reach it. They build simple revetments, dig drainage channels, raise paths, and return after seasonal flooding if the benefits outweigh the damage. In later centuries, when the city has become powerful, engineers may tame the water with channels, quays, drains, and embankments, but the first relationship is less grand. It is a daily reading of mud. Trade gives the place another reason to endure. A ford is more than a shallow crossing. It is a point where movement gathers. Traders pause there because animals need rest and loads need checking. Farmers come because passing strangers bring goods not easily made nearby. Potters, metalworkers, salt carriers, herders, fishermen and grain sellers all have reasons to appear at the same crossing. No one needs to plan a city for exchange to begin. Repetition creates habit. Habit creates paths. Paths create claims. A few shelters become a seasonal market. A seasonal market becomes a permanent cluster of households. A permanent cluster begins to need rules, storage, defense, and memory. This is one of the quieter surprises hidden beneath modern streets. The deepest layers are often not the remains of a single dramatic founding moment. They are the result of return. People come back to the same place because it works. A hearth is rebuilt near an older hearth. A fence line is replaced. A ditch is cleaned and recut. A burial is placed near earlier burials, turning useful land into ancestral land. The settlement becomes familiar not only because of practical advantage, but because the dead, the stories and the routines begin to root people there. What survives in the record suggests that early urban identity is often formed long before stone walls announce it. Defensive ground also plays its part. A small rise above marshland can protect against floods and attackers alike. A bend in a river may guard one side of a settlement. A cliff ridge or old terrace can narrow approaches. Even when early communities are not constantly at war, uncertainty shapes decisions. Stored food attracts thieves. Metal tools attract envy. Herds can be stolen. Political authority, if it exists, may be loose and shifting, but the need to protect people and supplies is constant. Archaeologists sometimes find palisade trenches, enclosure ditches, watch points, or evidence of burned structures in early layers. Scholars still debate whether such evidence always means organized conflict, because fire can come from accident, and ditches can serve many purposes. Still, fear has a way of leaving marks in the soil. The first forgotten layers are rarely glamorous. They do not yet show the grand civilization that later generations will bury under their streets. They show preparation without knowing it is preparation. A clay floor is trampled hard by repeated use. Grain is stored in pits lined with straw or clay. Bones show what people eat and what animals they keep close. Charred seeds reveal barley, wheat, millet, lentils, grapes, olives, or local staples depending on climate and region. Shells may show river gathering or trade from the coast. Imported stone, amber, obsidian, copper, tin, glass, or fine pottery may reveal connections that seem unexpectedly wide for a modest settlement. A place that looks local from above may already be tied to distant landscapes by the movement of rare materials. Human hands begin to alter the land in small but cumulative ways. Trees are cut, brushes cleared, clay is dug from pits. Animals graze paths into the grass. Fires open the ground. Refuse accumulates at the settlement edge. People return broken tools, food waste, ash, and worn objects to pits and hollows, not as offerings necessarily, but as disposal. Later archaeologists may read these discarded materials with more reverence than the original owners ever felt for them. A cracked cooking pot, a snapped pin, a fish spine, a burned grain kernel, each is ordinary, almost nothing until it becomes the only surviving witness. As the settlement grows, inequality may begin almost invisibly. One house becomes larger than another. One family controls better storage. One workshop produces goods beyond household needs. Certain graves contain ornaments, weapons, or imported materials, while others remain plain. These differences do not always mean king's officials or rigid classes. The evidence can be ambiguous, but they suggest that the place is changing from a cluster of survival into a community where status, skill exchange, and inheritance begin to matter. No civilization announces itself at birth. It gathers weight through repeated advantage. Religion or ritual may also begin in forms that later become difficult to separate from domestic life. A figurine appears in a house. A special deposit lies beneath a threshold. Animal bones are arranged in a way that looks more deliberate than ordinary waste. A burial is placed close to a dwelling, perhaps keeping ancestry within the living space. A spring hill, tree stone, or river bend may hold meaning that leaves little physical trace. Later temples might rise over or near these older sacred places, but certainty is rare. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the variety of early ritual traces found under cities. What matters is that the landscape becomes not only useful, but meaningful. Over generations, the settlement begins to thicken. New floors are laid above old ones. Paths become compacted. Storage grows more organized. Craft production intensifies. More people arrive drawn by trade, marriage, protection, opportunity, or obligation. The place may fall under the influence of a larger kingdom, empire, or regional power. It may become a border post, a river port, a market town, a shrine center, a military camp, or a local administrative hub. At this stage, it still may not resemble the buried civilization that later fascinates archaeologists, but the foundations are already there. Location, memory, labor exchange, and the stubborn human tendency to rebuild where others have already built. Above these earliest layers, centuries will lay heavier things. Stone streets, drainage systems, public squares, workshops, bathhouses, temples, warehouses, houses with painted walls, barracks, cemeteries, markets. The modern city will eventually erase the view of the old landscape, straightening rivers, covering streams, flattening ridges, enclosing open ground, and naming streets after people who arrived long after the first fires burned there. But deep below, the first choices remain. The modern street may follow the old track because the old track followed the easiest ground. The district may remain crowded because the crossing still matters. The city may forget its first people, yet continue obeying their geography. This is the beginning of the buried civilization, not a sudden eruption of greatness, but a slow fastening of human life to a favorable place. The ground accepts footprints, then posts, then hearths, then graves, then walls. The surface changes, but the decision to stay becomes the first true monument. Long before stone survives, before names survive, before records speak, a small community teaches the land to remember human weight. As the settlement grows heavier with people, goods, animals, smoke, and memory, the ground begins to require order. The old paths, once shaped by convenience, start to harden into streets. The spaces between houses narrow. A workshop that once stood near the edge of habitation now finds neighbours pressing close on every side. The track to the river becomes too important to remain a muddy habit. The route to the market cannot be blocked by every cart pen and pile of timber. The community has reached the point where movement itself becomes architecture. This is the moment when the buried city begins to look in fragments, like a city. Archaeologists may not find it whole. They may find only a line of stones beneath a modern boulevard, a drain cut by a subway tunnel, a courtyard floor under a bank vault, a foundation wall beneath a cafe, or a strip of ancient paving sealed beneath later rubble. Yet these pieces reveal a transformation. The place is no longer only a favourable settlement beside water and trade. It is becoming an organised urban world, one that channels bodies, water animals, carts, waste goods, and authority through planned spaces. The ancient street is one of the most important clues. It is also one of the easiest things for later people to forget. A street feels ordinary because it is meant to be used, not admired. But when an old street appears under a modern one, the effect can be startling. The paving may be scarred by wheel ruts. The edges may hold raised sidewalks, drainage gutters, or curbstones polished by thousands of passing feet. Repairs may show where stones cracked, sank, or were replaced. A street can preserve traffic, weather maintenance, and neglect all at once. It shows where people moved often enough for the city to invest in permanence. In some buried cities, streets form a grid or partial grid, evidence of planning. By officials, military engineers, colonists, surveyors, or civic authorities. In others, the pattern is more irregular, shaped by older paths, property boundaries, watercourses, religious enclosures, or defensive walls. Scholars still debate how much urban planning in many early cities came from centralized power and how much emerged from repeated local decisions. The evidence remains incomplete because later construction cuts through the pattern. Still, even a fragment of street alignment can reveal the logic of an entire district. A straight road may point toward a gate, bridge, forum, temple, harbour, or administrative centre. A crooked lane may preserve the stubborn memory of a stream, an earlier wall, or land ownership older than the city's grandest monuments. Homes cluster along these streets in patterns that expose social life. Some houses are small and practical with packed floors, simple hearths, and rooms arranged around work as much as comfort. Others have courtyards, painted plaster drains, storage rooms or mosaics that speak of wealth and display. In dense urban quarters, people live close enough to hear animals, tools, carts, footsteps and water moving through channels. Privacy exists, but it is fragile. A city concentrates not only population but smell, sound, risk and opportunity. The ancient home is not merely a shelter. It is often a workshop, warehouse, kitchen, sleeping place, shrine, and business front woven into one. The workshop is another foundation of the buried civilization. Under modern streets, archaeologists find kilns, slag moulds, loom, weights, dye vats, tools, cut bone, glass, waste leather scraps, and misfired pottery. These are not glamorous remains, but they are among the most revealing. They show a city turning raw materials into value. A potter needs clay water, fuel, drying space, and customers. A metal worker needs ore or scrap charcoal moulds, tools, and protection from fire. A textile worker needs fibers, weights, dyes, time, and hands. As production grows, certain streets may become associated with certain trades, not always officially, but through practical clustering. Smoke, noise, smell, and water use often push crafts into particular quarters. Here the buried record becomes intimate. A kiln collapsed before its last load fired properly. A jar cracked in production and was discarded. A bronze pin was dropped into a drain. A stone weight broke and was tossed into a pit. These small failures bring ancient labour close to the surface of imagination. They show people working not in mythic stillness, but in conditions full of irritation, pressure, routine, and mistake. What survives in the record suggests that the hidden civilization was built as much by repetition as by vision. Every repaired wall, sharpened tool, patched floor, and reused vessel speaks of a society that expected tomorrow to resemble today closely enough to make repair worthwhile. Water management marks another leap toward urban life. The earlier settlement lived with water. The city tries to command it. Wells are dug deeper. Cisterns collect rain. Channels bring fresh water or redirect runoff. Drains carry waste from streets and houses. Bathing places, fountains, latrines, and workshops depend on constant flow. In many ancient cities, water systems were practical achievements and political statements at the same time. To control water is to promise order. To fail at it is to invite disease, flooding, stench, and anger. Yet no system is perfect. Drains clog, streets flood, wells become contaminated. Floodwater backs through channels during storms. Repairs leave traces of urgency. Patched stone narrowed channels. Replacement brick improvised rerouting. Archaeologists sometimes find that the neatest plans on paper, when they can be reconstructed at all, were repeatedly interrupted by the unruly behaviour of mud and gravity. No single explanation fully accounts for every drainage layer because cities do not function as fixed machines. They are living arrangements under stress. Their systems reveal ambition, but also compromise. Public space begins to emerge with greater confidence. A square may form where roads meet. A market area may develop near a gate, harbour, bridge, or shrine. Administrative buildings may appear where authority needs visibility. Religious structures may rise on ground already made meaningful by older rituals or in new locations chosen to reshape the city's identity. A wall, whether defensive, symbolic, or both, may mark a stronger distinction between inside and outside. Gates become points of control. Goods can be taxed there. People can be watched there. News enters there. Armies may one day break through there. The grid or street system is never only about movement. It organizes power. Those who decide where roads go decide which districts connect easily and which remain marginal. They decide where markets can thrive, where soldiers can move, where water can flow, and where crowds can gather. A broad street may serve ceremony as much as traffic. A narrow lane may hide poverty or specialize in labor too dirty for elite neighborhoods. A district near the center may display status through stone plaster and decoration, while outer quarters hold cheaper materials and heavier work. The buried city, once only a place where people stayed because the landscape allowed it, now becomes a landscape made by people, and unequal in human ways. Still order never removes older memory. The ancient urban grid often grows over earlier settlement layers that refuse to vanish completely. A new road curves around an old sacred spot. A wall follows a previous boundary. A market remains near a crossing used for centuries. Even when officials impose straight lines, the city below remembers what came before. This is why modern excavation can feel less like uncovering one city than listening to several cities speaking through one another. The first track, the early ditch, the formal street, the medieval lane, and the modern avenue may all occupy nearly the same corridor, each believing itself current in its own time. One lesser-known detail of many buried cities is how much of urban life survives in negative space. A post hole is not a post. It is the absence left after wood decays. A robber trench is not a wall. It is the scar left when later builders removed stones for reuse. A stain in the soil may mark a beam, a pit, a fence, or a vanished channel. The city's earliest architecture may not survive as buildings at all, but as changes in texture and colour, fragile signatures that can disappear under a careless shovel. This makes the buried civilization strangely dependent on its own losses. Sometimes archaeologists learn where a structure stood because someone destroyed it, stole from it, or built through it. As streets spread and buildings multiply, the city develops a sense of inevitability. People born there may no longer think of it as a place that began. It simply is. Its roads are the roads. Its market is the market. Its shrines hold the familiar festivals. Its drains, walls, gates, and neighborhoods shape the habits of every day. Children learn shortcuts through lanes laid out before they were born. Merchants know which corner gathers customers first. Workers know where smoke from kilns blows in damp weather. Officials know which streets can carry a procession and which cannot. The city becomes a machine of memory guiding behavior through stone. This is the foundation later generations will unknowingly build upon. Not just walls and drains, but decisions. A road chosen for carts becomes a route for medieval wagons, then a modern street. A drain line becomes a property boundary. A market crossing becomes a square. A district of workshops becomes an industrial quarter centuries later, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes because inherited geography makes certain uses persistent. The forgotten civilization beneath the pavement is not hidden only because earth covers it. It is hidden because its success has been absorbed into ordinary movement. The oldest streets do not vanish entirely. They become habits too deep to notice. Inside the buried city, life begins before the streets are fully bright. Smoke rises first. It slips through roof openings, doorways, courtyards, and narrow lanes, carrying the smell of damp fuel, old ash bread oil, fish beans, onions, porridge, or whatever food the region and season can provide. The city does not wake all at once. It stirs in layers like the ground beneath it. Animals shift in pens. A pot scrapes against stone. A door bar is lifted. Water is drawn from a well or carried from a fountain. Somewhere a baker has been working while others slept because an urban morning cannot wait for every household to grind knead and fire its own bread from the beginning. This is the civilization that later becomes a fragment under modern streets, not only the stones but the ordinary pressure of repeated days. The great temptation is to imagine buried cities through their monuments, because monuments survive with confidence. Yet most of the people who made the city real lived in smaller rooms, used cheaper vessels, wore repaired clothing, and left behind objects so common that no one at the time would have called them important. A civilization is not sustained only by rulers, priests, builders, and soldiers. It is sustained by people carrying water, sweeping floors, feeding animals, hauling timber, mending sandals, counting measures of grain, stirring dye vats, cutting meat, cleaning drains, lifting baskets, and remembering which neighbour owes what. The street soon becomes crowded. A trader pushes through with a load balanced across the shoulders or stacked on a cart. A potter sets out vessels near the front of a workshop, arranging the best pieces where passing customers can see them. A metal worker checks the heat of a furnace, watching colour with an eye trained by experience rather than theory. A woman measures grain or oil in a courtyard not as a symbol of domestic life, but as one of the central acts of urban survival. Children run errands if they're old enough to be useful and young enough to squeeze through crowds. Elderly people sit near thresholds where private life touches public movement. A city makes people visible to one another whether they prefer it or not. The buried record preserves this closeness in surprising ways. At ancient street corners, archaeologists may find small shrines, lamps offerings, gaming pieces, tally marks, or graffiti scratched into plaster. In houses they find spindle whorls, needles, combs, grinding stones, storage jars, cooking pots, beads, keys, hinges, and small personal ornaments. Some objects show wear so heavy that they speak of thrift and necessity. Others show style, taste, and the desire to belong to a world of display. The evidence remains incomplete because wood, cloth, leather, and food vanish more easily than stone or pottery. Still, what survives in the record suggests a society full of hands and habits, not a silent architectural plan. Food leaves especially intimate traces: bones from cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, fish, shellfish, or wild animals reveal diet, trade preference, status, and environment. Cut marks show butchery. Burn marks show cooking or disposal. Seeds and pollen show what people grew, bought, stored, spilled, and burned. In some buried cities, tiny remains recovered from drains and latrines reveal fruits, spices, parasites, and imported foods that never appear in grand inscriptions. A city's stomach may tell a more honest story than its monuments. Elite houses might show access to expensive fish sauce, wine, fine oil, exotic spices, or delicate tableware, while poorer households rely more heavily on grains, pulses, cheap cuts, and whatever can be stretched across another day. Scholars still debate the exact meaning of some food evidence because waste does not always represent normal consumption, but the pattern is clear enough: the buried city eats unequally. Markets bind these lives together. They're not merely places of buying and selling, but places where rumour, regulation, trust, suspicion, and identity gather. A buyer must believe a measure is honest. A seller must judge whether a customer can pay. Officials may inspect weights, collect taxes, or enforce rules, though corruption and evasion are as old as administration itself. Imported goods change hands beside local produce. A cheap bowl may sit near a costly ornament. A traveller's accent marks distance. A coin passes from hand to hand carrying the image of a ruler, whose decisions may feel remote from the market's noise, yet whose taxes, wars, and laws shape every transaction. For many people, work is tied to family. A household may train children in the same craft for generations. Skills pass by, watching, correcting, repeating, and failing. Apprenticeship does not always leave a written contract. Sometimes it leaves a row of imperfect practice pieces, a workshop enlarged over time, or tools worn to fit a particular grip. A weaver knows thread by touch. A butcher knows joints by resistance. A mason knows stone by sound. A scribe, if the city has such specialists, knows the value of symbols that many others cannot read. Literacy, where present, is rarely evenly distributed. Writing may appear on tablets, potsherds, walls, seals, tags, accounts, inscriptions, or official documents, but many lives continue through memory marks, gestures, and spoken agreements that archaeology can only approach indirectly. Public authority enters daily life in uneven ways. Soldiers may patrol gates or live in barracks. Officials may record shipments, maintain roads, organize repairs, control water, or collect dues. Religious personnel may oversee offerings, festivals, calendars, burials, and the care of sacred spaces. But authority is not always a distant power descending from above. It may be embedded in neighborhood leaders, guild-like associations, family networks, patronage, property ownership, or control over storage. The city is a web of dependence. A laborer depends on wages or food distribution. A merchant depends on safe routes. A landlord depends on tenants. A temple depends on offerings, land, or prestige. A ruler depends on the city continuing to function well enough that people do not abandon, resist, or starve. Disease moves through the same web. Dense settlement brings opportunity, but it also brings infection. Wells can be polluted. Waste can gather in drains. Animals live near people. Insects breed in damp corners. Travelers bring goods and sometimes illness. Ancient people may not understand disease in modern biological terms, yet they are not careless fools. They notice bad smells, dirty water, spoiled food, and the danger of crowded quarters. They clean, drain, burn, perfume, isolate, pray, regulate, or avoid, as their knowledge and customs allow. No single explanation fully accounts for health patterns in ancient cities, because diet, class, sanitation, climate, age, occupation, and migration all matter. But human bones can reveal stress injury, infection, heavy labor, malnutrition, and sometimes surprising resilience. The city is also a place of sound, hammering, wheels on stone, animals braying, vendors calling, water pouring, children shouting, doors closing, tools striking, priests chanting, officials arguing, roof tiles shifting in wind, fire crackling in workshops. These sounds do not survive directly, but the built environment implies them. Narrow streets amplify noise. Courtyards hold voices. Workshops produce rhythms. Markets create a constant murmur of exchange. Modern excavation presents the buried city in stillness, but it was never still while alive. Even night would not erase it completely. Lamps burned, bakers worked, guards watched. Someone woke to a sick child, a leaking roof, a barking dog, or footsteps outside a door. Women's work, often under-recorded in official histories, holds the city together in ways archaeology only partly reveals. Grinding grain, preparing food, managing storage, producing textiles, caring for children, tending small animals, participating in trade, maintaining household cults, and sometimes running businesses or workshops all leave traces that can be difficult to assign neatly. Earlier scholars often underestimated this labor, because they looked first for public power and formal titles. More recent interpretations are more careful, though uncertainty remains. A loom weight does not tell the full identity of the person who used it. A kitchen does not explain the social world of those who worked there. Still, the material record makes one fact hard to avoid. Urban survival depends on labour that prestige rarely celebrates. Even the dead remain part of daily geography. Cemeteries may lie outside walls along roads, near churches, beneath houses, or in areas that shift over time as city boundaries change. Burials reveal age, disease, injury, migration status, ritual and grief, though they must be read cautiously. Grave goods may reflect belief, wealth, family choice, or local custom. Some bodies are carefully placed, others appear hurried, disturbed, reused, or displaced by later construction. The living build near the dead, over the dead, around the dead, and sometimes forget where the dead were placed. In a buried city, memory and neglect often occupy the same soil. By evening, the ancient streets darken in a way modern streets rarely do. Light comes from flame moon stars and the last glow from hearths. The city contracts into interiors, guarded thresholds, taverns, courtyards, barracks, and sacred precincts. The same streets that carried trade by day may feel uncertain after dark. People know which routes are safer, which corners to avoid, which neighbours can be trusted. The stones hold the warmth of sun for a while, then cool. Waste remains where no one has cleared it. A forgotten pot breaks underfoot. Somewhere a wall is patched, a debt is counted, a prayer is offered. A child sleeps beside a storage jar, and a worker's tool is placed where it can be found again at dawn. Centuries later, that tool may still be there, sealed beneath rubble, invisible under a modern sidewalk. The person who used it leaves no name, no portrait, no official story. Yet the object survives, because ordinary life repeated long enough becomes archaeology. The civilization buried under modern streets is not hidden only in its monuments. It is hidden in the worn handle, the cooking stain, the drain deposit, the cracked bowl, the child's bead, the repaired threshold, the ash beneath a floor. These remains do not shout, they accumulate, and together they make the vanished city human. A city buried under modern streets does not become powerful by accident. Beneath the later pavements, beneath the walls reused by medieval builders, and the cellars cut by modern contractors, there is usually an older engine at work. It may not look dramatic in excavation. It may appear as a row of storage jars, a harbour wall far from today's shoreline, a line of wheel ruts, a custom seal, a broken amphora stamped with a maker's mark, a warehouse floor darkened by spilled grain, or a set of coins dropped near a gate. Yet these are the traces of movement, and movement is what turns a settlement into a city. Trade begins with geography, but it grows through trust, risk, and repetition. The river that once gave the first settlers fish and water becomes a road made of current. Boats carry heavier loads than backs or animals can manage. Grain salt, wine oil, timber stone cloth, metal pottery, spices and hides move along the water, arriving from places the ordinary citizen may never see. A ford becomes a toll point. A landing place becomes a dock. A dock becomes a regulated harbour with warehouses, officials, labourers, ropes, cranes, baskets, barrels, and animals waiting along the bank. The modern city may have pushed the river into walls, buried old inlets, or moved its port downstream, but deep underground, the old commercial shoreline can still remain stranded like a memory of water. One of the stranger discoveries in many old cities is that harbours are sometimes found where no harbour seems possible. Street shops and apartments stand above them. Traffic passes over the remains of quays. The ancient waterline has vanished because rivers change course. Coastlines silt up, land is reclaimed, or later generations fill low ground to create buildable space. Archaeologists may uncover wooden piles preserved in wet soil anchors, mooring stones, ship timbers, fish bones, imported ceramics, and thick layers of silt. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record suggests that the buried city may once have faced a very different landscape, more open, wetter, and more directly connected to distant trade than the modern street plan admits. Roads extend that commercial web across land. At first they may be no more than hardened tracks, but as authority grows, roads become infrastructure. They are surfaced, drained, repaired, watched, taxed, and sometimes lined with tombs, workshops, inns, shrines, and military posts. A road entering the city through a gate brings more than goods. It brings news, migrants, soldiers, disease fashions, rumours, languages, and religious ideas. It also brings vulnerability. The same route that carries prosperity can carry an army. The same gate that welcomes merchants can be closed in fear. Cities owe much of their wealth to the roads that make them reachable, yet reachability is never innocent. Coins tell one part of this story, though they must be read carefully. A coin found under a floor may help date the layer, but it may have circulated for years before being lost. A hoard may represent savings, emergency concealment, ritual deposit theft or fear. A scatter of small change near a market may show constant low-value exchange. Imported coins may reveal contact movement of soldiers or the reach of political power. Inscriptions and images on coins announce rulers and official messages, but their archaeological context often speaks more quietly about daily transactions. A coin dropped beside a drain is not propaganda anymore. It is a mistake someone made while buying, selling, paying, gambling, or hurrying. Storage is the hidden skeleton of urban power. A city cannot live only from the food produced within its walls. It must gather supplies from fields, villages, estates, ships, caravans, and taxed territories. Grain has to be stored dry. Oil must be sealed. Wine must be transported in containers strong enough to survive roads and ships. Salt fish, dried fruit, legumes, cloth metal ingots, timber and tools all need space accounting and protection. Warehouses under modern cities may appear as thick walls, raised floors, rows of post holes, drainage features, or concentrations of broken containers. They are often less beautiful than temples, but they may explain the city's endurance more directly. A hungry city can become unstable with alarming speed. The amphora, the jar, the barrel, and the sack are the quiet technologies of trade. Pottery containers can reveal where goods came from because clay composition shapes stamps, and residue sometimes point to production regions. A broken jar in a buried district may show that wine crossed to sea oil came from a distant grove, or fish sauce travelled farther than the fish ever did alive. Residue analysis, when possible, can identify traces of contents, though certainty varies. Scholars still debate some trade patterns because containers can be reused, moved again, or copied in new regions. Still, the concentration of imported vessels in many buried cities shows that urban identity is rarely purely local. Even an ancient street now sealed beneath modern asphalt may have smelled of distant farms, foreign ports, and goods carried through several hands before arriving. Markets require measurement. Weight scales, measuring vessels, seals, tokens, tally sticks. Tablets and written accounts show that exchange becomes formal enough to demand verification. A merchant needs to know the quantity received. An official needs to tax or record it. A buyer needs some protection against fraud. Standardized weights are small objects, but they imply systems larger than themselves. They suggest shared expectations, authority, and dispute. A single stone weight may look humble in a museum case, but in the buried city it may have stood at the center of arguments over fairness, profit, and survival. The movement of goods also creates neighborhoods. Near docks there may be warehouses, taverns, cheap lodgings, repair shops, rope makers, fish sellers, money changers, and people who live by loading and unloading cargo. Near gates there may be stables, cart yards, inns, customs posts, and markets for travellers. Near industrial areas there may be kilns, smithies, dye works, tanneries, and waste pits. These districts are not always cleanly separated because ancient cities are crowded and practical, but patterns emerge. Noise smell, fire risk, water needs, and access to transport shape where work happens. The modern street above may now contain banks, apartments, cafes, or offices, but beneath it there may be a buried economy arranged around smoke mud animals and river traffic. Trade brings wealth, and wealth brings display. Imported marble, fine ceramics, glassware jewellery, pigments, exotic foods, carved ivory, decorated lamps, and rare stones may appear in elite houses and public buildings. Such objects can make the buried city seem cosmopolitan, but they also reveal inequality. Not everyone touches imported luxuries in the same way. Some buy them, some carry them, some repair them, some clean the rooms where they're displayed, some see them only from the street, or not at all. A city's prosperity may be impressive in aggregate while still harsh in lived experience. What survives in the record suggests that commercial success often deepens social difference as much as it expands opportunity. There is also a darker side to movement. Trade can include enslaved people, forced labour, captured populations, and people displaced by war debt, poverty, or imperial demand. The material record does not always make these lives easy to identify. A person can be buried with little sign of legal status. A workshop can produce goods without revealing whether labourers were free, bonded, enslaved, or dependent. Texts where they survive may mention sales ownership, manumission wages, or obligations, but written records often favour the perspective of those controlling labour. No single explanation fully accounts for the human cost behind ancient urban economies. Still, any honest picture of a powerful buried city must include the possibility that its roads carried not only goods, but people whose movement was not freely chosen. Because commerce ties the city to distant regions, outside events can reach it quickly. A failed harvest upriver raises grain prices. War closes a road. Pirates threaten a sea lane. A political change replaces one coinage with another. A flood ruins storage. A disease travels along trade routes. A new ruler demands heavier taxes. Prosperity makes the city stronger, but it also makes it dependent. The same networks that feed its growth can carry its crises. This dependence is often visible in sudden changes in the archaeological record: fewer imported goods, more local substitutes, hoarded coins, repaired containers, reduced building activity, or signs that public maintenance has slowed. Such shifts are not always easy to interpret, but they hint at stress moving through the hidden engine. At its height, the city may feel permanent to those who live inside it. Ships arrive, carts creak through gates, warehouses fill and empty, markets swell at certain seasons, taxes are collected, roads are repaired because they must be. A merchant marks accounts, a porter shoulders a load, a clerk presses a seal into clay. A cook buys oil that has travelled farther than most people in the neighbourhood ever will. The buried civilization is alive because movement continues. Its streets are arteries, its docks, lungs, its warehouses, stomachs, its markets, nerves, sending signals through the whole urban body. Centuries later, when modern construction cuts down through the same ground, the old engine appears broken into parts. A jar handle stamped with a name, a coin dark with corrosion, a key under an office block, a road beneath a basement, a warehouse floor under a plaza. These fragments may seem small, but together they reveal why the city mattered. It was not simply a place where people lived close together. It was a machine for gathering the world, sorting it, taxing it, consuming it, and sending it onward. That machine left its deepest marks not in legends, but in the practical remains of trade containers, roads, drains, docks, weights. and the durable evidence of things carried from one human hand to another. Where trade gives the buried city its pulse, public memory gives it a face. Beneath the modern street, beyond the practical remains of jars, drains, warehouses, and roads, there are places built to be seen, used, repeated, and remembered. A city does not become a civilization only because goods pass through it. It becomes one when people begin to recognize certain spaces as belonging to everyone, or at least to the idea of everyone, the square, where announcements are made the temple, where offerings gather the bath, where bodies and rumours circulate the fountain, where water becomes a civic promise, the hall, where law, status, and ceremony are performed. These places are rarely found whole. Modern streets cut them apart. Medieval builders quarry their stones. Later walls run across their floors. Pipes break through their foundations. A temple platform may survive only as a heavy block of masonry under a church or government building. A bathhouse may return as a patch of heated floor tiles, a fragment of painted plaster, a drain, and a few rooms whose functions must be reconstructed carefully. A public square may be known through paving stones, column bases, statue fragments, and the absence of domestic walls. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record suggests that these buildings shaped how the city understood itself. Temples are among the strongest anchors of ancient urban identity. They can stand at crossroads, on hilltops near springs, beside markets, within sacred precincts, or above older ritual places whose meanings are only partly recoverable. Their architecture often says as much about social order as belief. Some are open and visible, designed to dominate the approach. Others are enclosed, separating sacred action from ordinary life. Offerings may include lamps, coins, figurines, animal bones. Food remains vessels, jewellery, inscriptions, or deposits placed beneath floors and thresholds. Yet these traces do not always explain exactly what people believed. Archaeology can show repeated action. It cannot always recover the inner life of devotion. Religious buildings also change over time. A shrine may be expanded into a temple. A temple may be repaired after fire or earthquake. A sacred precinct may absorb older structures, erase them, or deliberately preserve them. Under a modern city, one sacred site may contain several religions layered over one another, not because history moved neatly from one belief to the next, but because powerful places tend to remain powerful. A later church, mosque, palace, or civic building may stand where an older sanctuary once stood. Sometimes this happens because the location is central and structurally useful. Sometimes it reflects a deliberate claim over memory. Scholars still debate particular cases because continuity of place does not always prove continuity of worship, but the pattern is striking. Cities often rebuild sacred authority on ground already heavy with meaning. Baths reveal a different kind of public life. In cities influenced by Roman urban traditions, especially bathhouses are not merely places to wash. They are systems of heat water, engineering, class routine, and sociability. A bath requires furnaces, fuel, water supply, drainage, maintenance workers, and architectural planning. Hypercost systems where hot air circulates beneath raised floors and through wall spaces can survive as small pillars of tile, soot-darkened chambers and flues. To a modern viewer, these remains may seem technical, but in their own time they create an experience of civic luxury. Warm rooms, hot rooms, cold pools, exercise spaces, oiling, scraping, conversation business, and display all combine in a ritual of urban belonging. Yet baths also expose inequality and strain. Fuel must be gathered or purchased. Water must be managed. Labourers must keep fires alive, clean spaces, repair pipes, and handle waste. Public access may vary by gender status, time, custom, or local regulation. A grand bath can symbolize civilization to those who benefit from it, while also demanding resources from surrounding landscapes and workers whose names vanish. No single explanation fully accounts for how every bathhouse functioned socially because customs differed across regions and periods. Still, their remains show that the buried city invested heavily in the body as a public concern. Cleanliness, leisure, health, and status were not private matters alone. They were built into stone. Fountains and water monuments make a quieter but equally powerful statement. To bring water into a city and make it visible is to turn necessity into authority. A fountain says that the city can command distance, gravity, labor, and supply. Aqueducts, channels, wells, cisterns, and distribution basins may lie hidden beneath streets, sometimes still influencing modern water routes long after their original systems failed. People gather at water points not only to fill jars but to exchange news, observe neighbours, negotiate obligations, and measure the competence of those who claim to govern. When water runs, the city appears ordered. When it fails, disorder becomes immediate. Public monuments also teach people where to look. Arches, columns, statues, inscriptions, gates, platforms, and commemorative buildings shape memory by making certain names and events unavoidable. A ruler's image in stone claims endurance. A victory inscription tells the city how power wants to be remembered. A statue in a square turns political authority into a daily landmark. But stone messages are not the same as public belief. People may pass them with loyalty, indifference, irritation, pride, or fear. Later generations may topple them, reuse them, bury them, or misread them. In a buried city, official memory often survives as fragments, precisely because unofficial life moved on around it. One lesser-known detail of urban archaeology is how often public buildings bear signs of repair improvisation and decline. Grand structures are not frozen in their moment of completion. Roofs leak, floors crack, drains clog, furnaces wear out, marble panels are removed, columns are reset, rooms change function. A temple courtyard becomes a workshop area. A bathhouse is partitioned into smaller spaces. A basilica or public hall is reused for storage housing or craft production. These changes can be misread as simple decay, but they may also reveal adaptation. The city does not always abandon its monuments dramatically. Sometimes it domesticates them, cannibalizes them, or makes them useful in humbler ways. The public square may be the most difficult place to imagine once it is buried because its importance lies partly in emptiness. A forum, plaza, market square, courtyard, or ceremonial open space is defined by what it allows: gathering, movement, announcement, spectacle, protest, trade, punishment, celebration, waiting. Archaeologists may find paving drains, edges of porticos, statue bases, and surrounding buildings, but the crowds are gone. The air that once held voices is filled with soil, yet the location may continue to matter. A modern square may lie above an ancient one because the city's circulation never fully forgot that this was a place to meet. Even when names change, human movement can preserve old centres with remarkable stubbornness. Public memory is not always noble. It can be selective, coercive, and fragile. A city may celebrate its founders while ignoring the labourers who cut its stone. It may honour victories while hiding defeats. It may build temples over older sacred sites and pretend continuity was natural. It may rename streets, erase former rulers, remove inscriptions, or bury uncomfortable pasts under new pavements. The civilization beneath modern streets is therefore not only forgotten by accident, it may have practiced forgetting in its own time. What survives in the record suggests that memory has always been managed, contested, and rebuilt. Still, people return to these public places because cities need shared rhythms. Festivals move through streets, markets gather on certain days, processions pass under gates, Water carriers return to fountains. Bathers follow familiar routines. Officials appear in recognizable spaces. The dead may be commemorated along roads. Sacred calendars structure time. Civic buildings give form to authority, but ordinary repetition gives them life. A temple without worshippers is stone. A bath without bodies is machinery. A square without crowds is paving. Public memory depends on use. Centuries later, when these places reappear under modern streets, they often do so in fragments that feel strangely theatrical. A mosaic floor under a bank, a column base beneath a traffic island, a cistern under a shop, a temple wall behind the basement of an apartment block, a bath furnace below a museum floor. The modern city may treat them as obstacles, treasures, heritage sites, or inconveniences depending on location and money. But each fragment reveals that the forgotten civilization once built spaces meant to outlast the ordinary day. It wanted water to flow bodies to gather gods or sacred powers, to be honored laws, to be seen rulers, to be remembered, and the city itself to feel permanent. That permanence was an illusion, but not a meaningless one. The public buildings did not prevent burial. They did not preserve every name. They did not keep the civilization from being overwritten by later streets. Yet they left enough behind to show that the people beneath the pavement thought beyond survival. They shaped identity in stone water heat ritual and open space. They made places where the city could recognize itself. And when modern excavation uncovers those places even briefly, the old city seems to do the same again, gathering its scattered memory beneath the feet of people who never knew they were walking over it. Prosperity gives the buried city confidence, but confidence can be a dangerous kind of blindness. The streets are busy, the warehouses fill the baths, steam, the temples receive offerings, and the markets absorb goods from roads and rivers, with the practiced appetite of a place that believes its own systems will continue. Yet beneath the movement pressure gathers. It may not appear first as a collapse. It may appear as repairs, delayed drains, neglected rooms, subdivided poorer materials used where better ones once stood, bones showing harder lives, coinage changing in quality or supply, imported goods becoming rarer, or fire scars cutting through crowded districts. The city does not need to fall for trouble to be visible. It only needs to strain. Overcrowding is one of the oldest urban weaknesses. As people arrive for work, safety, trade, administration, pilgrimage, or survival, the city becomes denser than its original systems were built to manage. Houses extend upward, inward, and outward. Courtyards shrink. Workshops push into domestic spaces. Storage occupies rooms where people once slept. Poorer residents crowd into rented quarters, temporary shelters, backrooms, upper floors, and marginal districts near walls, drains industrial areas or flood-prone land. A city can look powerful from its monuments, while ordinary people live with little space, poor air, and constant exposure to waste, fire noise, and disease. What survives in the record suggests that urban success often creates the very conditions that make urban life more fragile. Fire is one of the most immediate dangers. Ancient cities are full of fuel, wooden beams, thatch, textiles, baskets, oil lamps, charcoal cooking hearths, workshops, stored grain, dry waste, and crowded buildings sharing walls. A careless flame in a kitchen, a furnace burning too hot, a lamp knocked over in an upper room, or deliberate violence during unrest can send fire racing through a district. Archaeologists find burned beams, reddened clay, collapsed roof tiles, fused materials, blackened floors, and household goods trapped under debris. Sometimes fire preserves a moment with terrible clarity. A room abandoned in haste, a storage jar left sealed, tools lying where work stopped. but scholars still debate many burn layers because fire can mean accident warfare, ritual clearing, industrial activity, or later destruction. The ash tells of heat. The cause often remains elusive. Disease moves less visibly, but perhaps more relentlessly. Dense populations create ideal conditions for infection, especially where water is contaminated, waste management is uneven, animals live close to humans, and travellers constantly enter from other regions. Latrines, drains, wells, and water channels can reveal parasites and sanitation problems, though interpretation requires care. Human skeletons may show stress, malnutrition, chronic infection trauma, or patterns of mortality, but bones do not record every epidemic. Many deadly diseases leave little trace in the skeleton. A cemetery suddenly filled with hurried burials may suggest crisis, but it may also reflect war, famine, plague, or a change in burial practice. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the health of an ancient city. Still, the basic risk is clear: the same networks that bring wealth can bring sickness. Political pressure adds another layer. A city tied to a kingdom, empire, or regional power benefits from protection. Roads, law, and trade, but it also pays for them. Taxes rise. Grain is requisitioned. Soldiers are quartered. Local elites compete for favour. Building projects demand labour and money. A distant ruler's war can empty storerooms, disrupt commerce, and bring refugees to the gates. Coins may change, inscriptions may celebrate victories, and official buildings may continue to project stability, while ordinary households show signs of belt tightening. Cheap repairs replace finer work. Broken vessels are mended more often. Imported goods decline. Storage patterns shift. Such traces do not always prove political crisis, but they suggest a city adjusting to pressure from beyond its streets. Environmental stress is slower and more difficult to see, but it can be decisive. Rivers flood too often or not enough. Harbours silt up. Springs weaken. Fields lose fertility. Nearby forests are cut for fuel, building, timber, and industry. Marshes expand. Drought reduces harvests and raises food prices. Storms damage waterfronts. Earthquakes crack walls and water systems. Climate shifts may change agricultural reliability over decades or centuries. Ancient people are often adaptable, but adaptation costs labour and coordination. A city can survive one bad year, perhaps several. It is the stacking of stresses that becomes dangerous: poor harvests with political demands, disease with overcrowding, flood damage with weakened maintenance, war with trade disruption. The buried record sometimes shows this stacking in small contradictions. A grand public building remains in use, but nearby houses deteriorate. A market continues, but imports become less diverse. A wall is strengthened, suggesting fear, while water systems show neglect, suggesting limited resources. A cemetery grows, but official monuments still proclaim order. The city may not understand itself as declining. People rarely experience history as a clean downward line. They experience higher prices, delayed repairs, stricter officials, unfamiliar soldiers, relatives leaving neighbours, arriving rumours from the road, a well that tastes wrong, a roof that cannot yet be fixed. Collapse, when seen from inside, may feel like a long series of practical problems. Social inequality sharpens these problems. Wealthy families can store food, move to safer districts, repair property, hire protection, or leave temporarily. Poorer residents remain closer to risk. They live in more crowded spaces, depend more immediately on wages or daily markets, and suffer first when grain prices rise or work slows. Their houses are more likely to be built of cheaper materials and rebuilt with salvaged debris. Their dead may be buried with fewer markers. Their suffering may leave little written record unless officials notice it as disorder. Archaeology can sometimes restore part of that imbalance through bones housing density diet evidence and disposal patterns. What survives in the record suggests that cities do not fail evenly. Religious and public life may respond to uncertainty in visible ways. More offerings appear at certain shrines. Old sacred places regain attention. New cult saints, gods, rituals, or protective practices spread through the population. Amulets, figurines, curse tablets, votive deposits, and household ritual objects may multiply in some contexts, though caution is needed because such patterns can also reflect fashion population change or preservation bias. Still, uncertainty often deepens the need for meaning. When drains fail and prices rise, when disease moves through alleys and rumours grow at gates, people look for causes beyond administration and weather. The city becomes not only a machine of trade, but a landscape of anxiety. There may also be signs of violence. Defensive walls are repaired or thickened, gates are narrowed, barracks expand. Weapons appear in unusual contexts, bodies show trauma, destruction layers cross streets and buildings, hoards are hidden and never recovered. Yet violence is rarely simple. A burned district may result from invasion, civil conflict, accident, or official clearance. A skeleton with injury may belong to a soldier victim, criminal worker, or someone harmed in ordinary life. Scholars still debate many supposed destruction layers because dramatic explanations are tempting. The ground offers evidence, but it does not always offer a confession. Perhaps the most unsettling sign of trouble is reuse. Reuse is not automatically decline. It can be practical, efficient, and creative. But when fine buildings are stripped for stone statues, broken for lime public rooms, partitioned into crude housings, drains, blocked by refuse, and once formal spaces filled with workshops or dumps, something in the city's balance has changed. People are no longer maintaining old meanings in the same way. They're extracting value from them. The monument becomes a quarry. The courtyard becomes a pen. The bath becomes storage. The temple wall becomes raw material. The city remains alive, but its memory is being consumed from within. By the time danger becomes impossible to ignore, the buried civilization may already be changing beyond recognition. Its streets still carry feet. Its markets still open. Its citizens still cook, mend, worship, argue, trade, and sleep. But beneath those routines, the foundations of confidence are weakening. The systems that once made the city powerful now expose it. Trade routes carry instability, density carries disease, monuments demand maintenance, water systems require expertise, political connections bring obligations, and memory itself becomes costly to preserve. Trouble does not always arrive as a single enemy at the gate. Sometimes it rises quietly through the drains, settles in the price of grain hides in the ash of a rebuilt room, and waits inside the ordinary work of keeping a city alive. The day the surface changes does not always announce itself as the end of a civilization. It may begin with rain that does not stop with smoke beyond the wall, with a tremor beneath the paving stones, with a rumour from the road, with officials ordering gates barred, with families packing what they can carry, or with people doing nothing unusual because danger has not yet taken a recognisable shape. Later, when archaeologists stand in the trench and study the broken layers, the turning point may look sudden. A band of ash, a collapsed wall, a floor sealed under flood silt, a row of bodies buried without ceremony, a hoard of coins hidden and never reclaimed. But for those inside the city, catastrophe often arrives as confusion before it becomes history. A city under pressure can endure for a long time, but there are moments when accumulated weakness meets a force too large to absorb. An invasion can turn streets into traps. A flood can erase the boundary between river and road. An earthquake can crack walls, rupture water systems and drop heavy roofs onto rooms where people had expected another ordinary day. A fire can leap through crowded quarters and leave behind a blackened layer that future excavators will trace with careful brushes. Political collapse can empty offices, interrupt payments, and leave public maintenance to fail quietly. A new regime can redirect trade, dismantle old institutions, and make the city's former identity inconvenient. No single explanation fully accounts for every buried urban turning point, because cities are rarely destroyed by one clean cause. More often, disaster chooses a body already weakened. The archaeological signature of such a day is sometimes brutally clear. In a burned district, timber beams fall inward and seal household objects beneath roof tiles. Clay walls bake hard in the heat, metal fittings twist, pottery blackens, grain stored in jars chars and survives as fragile carbon. The fire that destroys also preserves, creating a frozen moment that can be read centuries later. A cup lies near a threshold. A key remains where it fell. Tools are abandoned mid-use, but even here certainty can be treacherous. Fire layers can result from attack, accident, ritual clearing, industrial activity, or later demolition. Scholars still debate many famous destruction horizons because the human imagination loves a dramatic ending, while the soil often gives only evidence of burning, not the intention behind the flame. Floods leave a different kind of silence. Where fire sharpens a moment, water smooths and covers. Silt enters rooms, fills streets, buries drains, and settles into hollows. Fine sediment can seal floors with extraordinary gentleness, preserving footprints, seeds, wood, and organic remains in conditions where air cannot easily destroy them. A river that once fed the city can become the force that lowers it into darkness. In low-lying districts, repeated flooding may raise the ground level over generations until older walls survive only as stumps beneath later surfaces. A single catastrophic flood may be remembered if texts survive, but more often water works without a narrator. The modern street above may seem dry and permanent, while several meters below it lies the memory of mud. Earthquakes can be harder to interpret, but their traces are distinctive when conditions allow. Walls lean in consistent directions, columns collapse, floors buckle, heavy stones crush lighter structures beneath them, repairs follow fault lines through buildings, water channels shift or break. People rebuild because abandoning a city is not always possible, especially when trade's sacred meaning and political power are fixed to the place. Yet after a severe earthquake, the city may never return to the exact shape it had before. Public buildings may be repaired in cheaper materials. Damaged districts may be abandoned, repurposed, or filled with rubble to create higher ground. The surface changes not only because the earth moved, but because people respond to damage with the resources and priorities available to them. War leaves some of the most tempting evidence and some of the most difficult. Arrowheads, sling stones, weapon fragments, burned gates, hurried burials, damaged walls, and hoarded valuables can suggest violence. A destruction layer near a city wall may fit the story of siege. Bodies in streets may suggest sudden death. Yet warfare is not the only source of trauma, and not every conquest produces a neat archaeological scar. Some cities surrender, some are occupied, some are taxed, renamed, and absorbed without being burned. Others are devastated and then rebuilt by the same or new inhabitants. The evidence remains incomplete, and the absence of destruction does not mean the absence of suffering. A city can lose its identity through administration as surely as through fire. Sometimes the turning point is not destruction, but replacement. A new power enters and decides that the old city will serve a different purpose. Temples are closed, converted, stripped, or left to decay. Official buildings are reused. Street names change, markets shift. Elite families leave or adapt. Soldiers occupy strategic points. Sacred spaces are reinterpreted. The old order does not vanish overnight, but its public face begins to fade. For ordinary people, this may be less important than access to food safety and work, at least at first. A potter still needs customers. A parent still needs water. A labourer still needs wages. But slowly the symbols that made the city recognisable to itself are altered, and later generations inherit structures whose meanings have already been blurred. The moment of abandonment, when it occurs, is rarely as complete as the phrase suggests. A district may empty while another survives. Wealthy residents may depart first, carrying portable valuables. Poorer people may remain in damaged buildings because they have nowhere else to go. Squatters may occupy ruins. Workshops may move into former public spaces. Farmers may cultivate open lots inside walls. Burials may appear in abandoned neighbourhoods, turning living districts into funerary ground. Dogs, birds, weeds, and rain enter places once maintained by human order. Abandonment is often uneven, and what looks like a dead city from a distance may contain pockets of stubborn life. One surprising detail in many buried cities is how much people salvage during or after crisis. They remove roof tiles, beams, metal clamps, door fittings, statues, paving stones, bricks, and dress blocks. They dig into older walls for reusable material. They strip marble and burn limestone for lime. This means the absence of valuable objects does not always mean poverty at the moment of destruction. It may mean later people were practical. Catastrophe does not end use. It changes what the city is used for. The once proud building becomes a quarry. The bath becomes a shelter. The temple becomes a source of stone. The street becomes a dumping ground or a path through ruins. The turning point also changes memory. Those who survive explain the event in ways shaped by belief, politics, grief, and blame. A flood may become punishment, bad governance, bad luck, or a natural disaster depending on who speaks. A fire may become enemy violence or tragic accident. A conquest may be described as liberation by one group and devastation by another. If writing survives, it may preserve only the official version. If writing does not survive later, archaeology must work through ash bones, silts, repairs, and gaps. What survives in the records suggests that the city's fall was not merely a physical process, but a struggle over meaning. After the surface changes, rebuilding begins wherever life still insists on continuing. Rubble is levelled. Usable stones are gathered. Streets are cleared, narrowed, or abandoned. New floors are laid over destruction. A room is rebuilt smaller than before. A drain is patched badly but sufficiently. A family returns to a damaged house because the walls still stand. A ruler sponsors a monument to prove continuity. A community builds a new sacred structure over the scar of an old one. The new surface hides the catastrophe not out of deception, but because people must walk somewhere. The city learns to step over its wound. This is how a buried civilization begins its descent beneath future streets. Not necessarily by disappearing in one dramatic night, but by crossing a threshold after which the old arrangements no longer hold. The surface that once carried its public life is broken. Covered, repaired, reused, and overwritten. Later generations may know that something happened, but not exactly what. Later still, they may only inherit a raised street, a strange foundation, a layer of ash under a basement, a rumour of an older city below. The day the surface changes becomes a line in the ground. Above it, another city starts to grow. A city does not need a desert storm, a volcanic eruption, or a single legendary flood to disappear beneath the ground. More often it is buried by the ordinary behaviour of cities themselves. After the surface changes after fire, flood conquest, earthquake neglect, or slow economic weakening, people still need places to stand, sleep, trade, cook, and pass through. They do what people have always done with damaged ground. They level it, they fill holes, they drag broken stone into low places. They push rubble into rooms whose roofs have collapsed. They cover unsafe floors with new floors. They raise streets because mud has made the older street useless. They build again because removal is harder than concealment. This is one of the most important facts about a forgotten civilization under modern streets burial, is not always an event. It is a habit repeated for centuries. The ancient city becomes underground not because everyone agrees to bury it, but because each generation solves immediate problems in practical ways. A burned building becomes a source of brick and tile. The unusable debris becomes fill. A collapsed cellar becomes a dumping pit. A street full of ruts received a new surface above the old one. A flood deposit is compacted and paved. A damaged wall is cut down to foundation height and used again. The ground rises in small decisions. No one living through them sees the whole vertical history being made. Rubble is the first great material of burial. When a roof collapses, its tiles, beams, plaster, and dust settle into the rooms below. If the building is abandoned or only partly cleared, this debris creates a rough platform. Later, people may remove valuable timber metal fittings and dressed stone, but leave behind broken mortar fragments of brick, crushed pottery ash, and soil. Over time, these materials become compacted. A new wall may be founded directly on them. A floor may be laid across them. The destroyed room turns into a layer, and the layer turns into invisible support. The old house remains present, but only as weight. Street raising is another quiet force. Ancient and medieval streets often collect mud animal waste dust ashes, broken objects, and flood sediment. If cleaning cannot keep pace, the road surface becomes uneven or foul. Instead of excavating down to an older level, communities may add material and create a new surface. Stones are reset. Gravel is spread. Paving slabs are placed over compacted fill. Drains are adjusted, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. After enough repetitions, thresholds that once opened naturally onto a street may sit too low, forcing buildings to modify entrances. Ground floors become basements. Basements become cellars. Cellars become sealed voids. The city climbs over itself. Sediment works more slowly but with enormous persistence. Wind carries dust. Rain moves soil downslope. Rivers spread silt across low districts. Floodwater deposits fine layers that settle into cracks and hollows. In coastal cities, harbours silt up and waterfronts shift. In dry regions, wind-blown sand and dust may accumulate against walls. In wetter regions, mud and organic waste can build deep, dark deposits rich in seeds, insects, bone, leather, and wood. The evidence remains incomplete because later construction disturbs many layers. Yet what survives in the record suggests that natural processes and human activity are rarely separate. A flood leaves sediment. People walk on it level, it cut into it, build over it, and turn disaster into ground. Waste is also a builder, though a less romantic one. Cities generate refuse constantly. Broken pottery, butchered bone ash, spoiled food, worn tools, construction debris, sewage, industrial waste and household rubbish have to go somewhere. Pits are filled, ditches become dumps, abandoned rooms receive trash, low areas are raised with refuse mixed into soil. In some excavations, the richest evidence for daily life comes from places ancient people considered dirty, useless, or finished. A city's garbage can preserve diet, craft, trade, disease, and habit with the honesty that monuments rarely offer. It is strange but true that a civilization may be remembered most clearly through what it threw away. Rebuilding creates deeper confusion. A new building rarely respects the archaeological neatness future scholars might desire. Its builders cut foundation trenches through older floors, walls, burials, and drains. They reuse stones from earlier monuments. They fill earlier rooms to stabilize new walls. They straighten old boundaries or preserve them without knowing their origin. In a long-lived city, one phase wounds another. A medieval foundation may slice through an ancient shop. A modern sewer may remove half of a Roman street. A subway tunnel may pass under a church that itself rests on a temple platform that rests on earlier houses. The ground becomes a palimpsest, not a stack. It is rewritten, scraped, patched, and overwritten again. This is why archaeologists often read buried cities through relationships rather than simple depth. Deeper usually means older, but not always. A pit dug in a later period can reach down into ancient layers and place recent objects at great depth. A wall built later can reuse older stones, confusing style and date. A flood can move artifacts from one context to another. A grave can cut through earlier occupation. A modern utility trench can destroy the very evidence needed to connect fragments. Scholars still debate many urban sequences because the city's continuity is both a gift and a problem. It preserves layers by covering them, then damages them by needing to function. In some places, burial is accelerated by deliberate acts of transformation. Conquerors may level a sacred precinct and build over it. Authorities may fill an old harbour basin to create new land. A ruler may raise an entire platform to display power above earlier neighbourhoods. After a fire, officials may impose a new street plan burying old lanes under wider avenues. After a flood, engineers may raise ground levels to prevent recurrence. These acts can be practical, political, or symbolic. They may erase memory intentionally or simply treat older memory as an obstacle. No single explanation fully accounts for the motives behind every major fill layer, but the effect is similar. The past becomes foundation. There is also burial through survival. When later people reuse earlier walls, those walls remain hidden inside newer buildings. An ancient arch may become part of a medieval cellar. A temple column may support a church porch. A city wall may become the back wall of houses. A Roman drain may continue carrying water long after its builders are forgotten. These survivals complicate the idea of disappearance. The old civilization is gone as a recognizable world, but parts of it keep working. They are not preserved in museums yet. They are functional, uncelebrated, absorbed. The past vanishes partly because it is too useful to leave alone. As centuries pass, the buried layers become harder to see even for those who live among them. The raised ground feels natural. The strange cellar wall is accepted as simply old. A reused stone with carved decoration is turned inward, hidden in masonry. A street's odd curve becomes local character, not evidence of a vanished boundary. People may know legends of tunnels, giants, old kings, pagan temples, lost wells, or underground chambers, but such stories blend memory with imagination. Some may contain distorted truths, others may not. Archaeology must listen to them cautiously. Popular theories often rush to make buried cities mysterious in the wrong way, inventing secret races, impossible technologies, or sudden global cataclysms where ordinary urban processes are enough. The real mystery is slower and in many ways more unsettling. Because burial is gradual, the moment of forgetting is difficult to locate. The first generation after a disaster remembers the old street. The next knows it as the lower level. Later builders find its stones and call them ancient. Still later, no one knows why the ground is so high, or why the basement wall is made from blocks unlike the rest. Memory thins while material remains. The civilization passes from lived reality to inherited ruin, from ruin to quarry, from quarry to foundation, from foundation to obstacle, from obstacle to discovery. At each stage something is lost and something is preserved. By the time the modern city stands above it, the buried world is sealed not under one layer but under many acts of human continuation. Concrete rests on brick, brick rests on rubble, rubble rests on ash, ash rests on paving, paving rests on compacted soil crossed by older footsteps. The modern street seems flat because a city has spent centuries smoothing its own damage. Beneath that smoothness lies a record of collapse, repair, waste, flood, ambition, forgetting and reuse. The forgotten civilization is not simply under the pavement. It has become part of the pavement's reason for being. Long after the older city has lost its original name, later inhabitants continue to live above its bones with a confidence that is both practical and incomplete. They do not walk through a cleanly abandoned ruin. They inherit a landscape already altered by centuries of burial, collapse, reuse and repair. Walls rise from ground that hides other walls. Houses stand against foundations whose builders belong to forgotten authorities. Streets bend around obstacles no one can see. Wells are cleaned, deepened or abandoned. Stones from temples, baths, gates and public halls appear in new buildings, stripped of old meaning but not of usefulness. The ancient city has become raw material. In the medieval city above the ruins, survival matters more than archaeological respect. A block of squared stone is valuable because it has already been cut. A column shaft can become a threshold, a support, a trough, a roller, or part of a wall. Bricks from an old bathhouse can repair a house. Marble from a public monument can be burned into lime. A carved slab can be turned face inward so that its inscription disappears into mortar. Later builders may know the material is old, perhaps even Roman, Greek, Byzantine, or belonging to some half-remembered people, but oldness alone does not guarantee preservation. Use is a stronger force than reverence. This reuse, often called spolia by scholars, is one of the most visible ways buried civilizations survive inside later ones. It can be practical, symbolic, or both. A ruler might place ancient columns in a new church, mosque, palace, or civic building to claim authority from the past. A village mason might use the same kind of column, simply because it is available and strong. A stone bearing an inscription may be respected, ignored, misunderstood, or deliberately erased. The evidence remains incomplete in many cases because intention does not fossilize easily. What survives in the record suggests that later, societies often lived with ancient remains in several ways at once, as quarry, memory, prestige, nuisance, and foundation. Medieval builders also inherit the hidden logic of older streets. They may not know why a lane follows a particular line, but property boundaries and traffic habits keep it alive. A road once laid out for carts, soldiers, merchants, or processions may become a medieval market street. A former gate road may still draw shops because movement still concentrates there. A bridge approach may remain important even if the bridge has been rebuilt many times. The old city's plan lingers not as a map, but as a behavior. People continue to walk where earlier people walked because the city has made those routes convenient, profitable, or unavoidable. Some ancient structures are too massive to remove, so later life grows around them. A city wall becomes a boundary for gardens or houses. An amphitheatre becomes a fortress, a neighbourhood, or a ring of dwellings. A bath complex becomes cellars, workshops, storage rooms, or a place to scavenge brick. A temple platform supports a religious building of a different faith. A buried cistern continues to collect water, sometimes understood as old engineering, sometimes as mysterious underground chamber. In certain places, residents may live literally inside ancient architecture, dividing vast spaces into small rooms and domestic corners. The old monument stops being a monument and becomes shelter. This transformation can make the ancient civilization harder to recognize. A ruin outside a living city may remain visibly separate, but a ruin absorbed into housing loses its outline. Its stones are patched, plastered, cut through and built against. Its original entrances are blocked. Its decorative surfaces are removed. New floors divide old heights. Smoke from medieval hearths stains walls once polished for public display. A room built for bathing becomes storage for grain. A vaulted passage becomes a cellar. A sacred courtyard becomes a yard for animals. No single explanation fully accounts for every reuse, because need belief, poverty, opportunism, and authority all shape decisions. Still, the pattern is clear. Later life does not simply cover the ancient city, it digests it. The people of the medieval city may hold fragmentary memories of what lies beneath them. A place name might preserve an old market gate, Bath Bridge shrine, or palace. A district might be known for ruins, old stones, caves, giants, saints, devils, kings, or tunnels. Some stories may contain echoes of real structures. Others may grow from imagination around visible fragments. A large underground chamber becomes a legendary prison. A buried road becomes a secret passage. A carved stone becomes the work of ancient heroes. Scholars still debate how much value such traditions carry because oral memory changes shape over time. Yet even distorted legends show that the ground feels unusual. People sense that something older is present even when they cannot name it accurately. Christian churches, Islamic mosques, medieval synagogues, monasteries, palaces, and civic halls in many old cities are often entangled with earlier remains. Sometimes they are built over older sacred sites. Sometimes they reuse columns, capitals, pavements, and foundations because these materials are available. Sometimes they deliberately replace earlier symbols of power. The result is not a simple story of one civilization erasing another. It is a layered process in which memory is claimed, challenged, recycled, and sometimes accidentally preserved. A carved pagan relief may survive because it is buried under a floor. An imperial inscription may survive because no one bothered to remove it from a wall. A mosaic may endure because later builders covered it while laying a new surface. Water systems also continue to shape medieval life. Ancient drains, aqueducts, wells, and cisterns may be repaired, repurposed, or forgotten. A city that loses the technical organization to maintain a large aqueduct may rely more on wells, fountains, springs, rainwater storage, or smaller channels. Old conduits may become blocked with silt or debris. Others remain useful for centuries. When later workers crawl through these systems, they may encounter a past that is not dead, but still functioning in darkness. Water can preserve continuity where official memory fails. A citizen drawing from a medieval well may be using a water source first organized by people whose language, gods, and government have vanished. The medieval city above the ruins is often smaller, poorer, or differently organized than the ancient city below, but it is not merely a decline. This is important. Older histories sometimes imagine post-ancient layers only as decay, as if everything after the classical city were a long collapse. Modern archaeology is more careful. Later inhabitants create their own worlds, technologies, beliefs, economies, and adaptations. They farm inside old walls, build new religious centers, organize craft quarters, defend neighborhoods, and reshape trade to fit new political realities. They may lack some systems their predecessors used, but they are not simply living in the shadow of greatness. They are making a city from what remains. Still, the presence of ancient ruins affects their choices. A huge wall can define defense. A buried drain can determine where water flows. Old foundations can make some places easier to build on and others strangely unstable. Rubble mounds can become high ground. Former public spaces can become markets because they remain open. Cemeteries may form near ancient roads because those roads still lead outward. Even the dead of later centuries may be placed in soil already crowded with older burials, creating a dense human archive beneath churchyards, courtyards, and lanes. There is a quiet irony in this. The very people who help erase the ancient city also help preserve it. By building over mosaic floors, they protect them from weather. By filling cellars, they seal artifacts in stable darkness. By reusing foundations, they keep the old street line alive. By quarrying monuments, they sometimes carry inscriptions into walls where they survive by accident. Destruction and preservation are not opposites in a living city. They often happen through the same action. A stone removed from a temple is lost from the temple but saved inside another building. A floor covered by medieval debris disappears from view but survives for future excavation. Over time, the ancient civilization becomes a rumour beneath medieval feet. It remains in the strange thickness of walls, the odd angle of streets, the unexpected strength of foundations, the carved stone in a humble doorway, the old vault under a shop, the well that seems deeper than anyone remembers. People live with these things because cities train their inhabitants to accept complexity as ordinary. A child grows up beside a wall, made from stones of different colours, and never asks why. A merchant stores goods in a cellar whose bricks were laid 1,000 years before. A mason breaks an inscription into pieces because it is the right size for a threshold. The past is everywhere and therefore almost invisible. By the time the modern age begins to press its own machinery into the ground, the ancient city has already passed through many hands. It has been quarried, sanctified, misread, feared, ignored, and inhabited. It has become medieval streets, parish boundaries, market lines, cellars, walls, and legends. The forgotten civilization is no longer a buried layer alone. It is a set of inherited decisions hidden inside later life. The modern streets above will one day cut deeper than any medieval builder could have imagined, but they will not be the first to disturb the old world. They will only be the latest feet on ground that has been reused for so long that forgetting itself has become part of the architecture. The modern city arrives with a different appetite for the ground. Medieval builders dig foundations, cellars, graves, wells, and drains, but the industrial and modern city cuts deeper faster and with less patience. It wants sewers wide enough to carry the waste of entire districts. It wants railway tunnels, subway platforms, electrical conduits, gas lines, water mains, basements, parking structures, service corridors, and foundations strong enough to hold towers of steel, glass, and concrete. The city that once buried itself slowly now begins to excavate itself by force, and every trench becomes a negotiation between progress and memory. At first, many discoveries are treated as obstacles. Workers strike a wall where no wall should be. A machine scrapes across paving stones. A deep shaft fills with pieces of pottery, bone timber, and brick that do not belong to any recent building. Engineers are trained to solve problems, not to pause before every older surface, and modern construction schedules can be ruthless. In earlier centuries of development, countless ancient layers were destroyed before anyone recorded them properly. Streets were widened, rivers were embanked, sewers were driven through buried districts and foundations, swallowed evidence that would now be considered priceless. The evidence remains incomplete, partly because modernity itself became one of the great destructive layers. Yet modern construction also reveals what older generations could not see. A sewer trench may cut through the entire history of a street in one vertical slice. A subway station may expose meters of accumulated occupation, from modern debris down through medieval floors, Roman drains, pre-urban ditches and natural clay. A basement excavation can uncover walls, burials, wells, roads, hearths, and refuse pits sealed for centuries. A railway line can cross old suburbs and cemeteries outside the ancient walls. What was once hidden by continuity becomes visible because the modern city digs with unprecedented power. It damages the archive, but it also opens it. The 19th and early 20th centuries are full of such uneasy discoveries. Expanding capitals and industrial towns encounter their buried predecessors while laying sewers, cutting roads, building stations and replacing old neighborhoods with new ones. Sometimes antiquarians rush to collect inscriptions, statues, coins, and architectural fragments. Sometimes local museums receive boxes of objects with poor records of where they came from. Sometimes newspapers announce spectacular finds with excitement. Then the trench is filled and the location is forgotten again. Scholars still debate many early urban discoveries because the artifacts survive without reliable context. A beautiful object without its layer is like a sentence torn from a book whose language is already difficult to read. Modern streets, however, preserve ancient shadows in ways that are not always below ground. A financial district may follow the outline of an old fort. A boulevard may lie over a Roman road. A neighborhood boundary may mark a vanished wall. A churchyard may sit above a cemetery that has been used, emptied, reused, and built over for centuries. Property lines may preserve the shapes of medieval plots, which in turn preserve older Roman or pre-Roman divisions. A river now hidden in a culvert may explain why streets curve unexpectedly. A modern square may occupy an ancient open space because crowds have gathered there for so long that planning has become inheritance. The industrial city also changes the chemistry of preservation. Deep basements drain wet deposits that once protected organic remains. Pollution stains layers. Heavy foundations compress older material. Vibrations from traffic and trains affect fragile structures. At the same time, sealed pockets under roads, embankments and demolished buildings can preserve wood, leather seeds, insects, textiles, and human remains in remarkable condition, especially where waterlogged soil keeps oxygen away. One lesser-known surprise of urban archaeology is that the dirtiest, wettest, least glamorous deposits can be the richest. A dark, foul layer beneath the street may contain the remains of meals, parasites, shoe leather plant fibers, wooden tools and environmental clues that grand stone buildings never preserve. As cities modernize, the contrast between surface and depth becomes sharper. Above ground, there are banks, government offices, apartment blocks, tram lines, electric lights, department stores, cafes, and advertising. Below there are Roman streets, Byzantine walls, Ottoman cisterns, Aztec temples, medieval wells, plague burials, Saxon ditches, colonial drains, and prehistoric traces pressed into the same vertical world. The modern citizen may live with an illusion of novelty, new materials, new machines, new speed. But beneath that speed, older cities remain arranged in darkness, sometimes so close to the surface that a basement wall is older than the nation around it. This closeness can produce strange moments. A shop owner discovers an ancient wall behind plaster. A homeowner opens a cellar and finds a vaulted chamber too old for the house. Road workers uncover a burial under a traffic lane. A subway project pauses because a ship, a street, or a cemetery appears where passengers were supposed to pass. Construction workers become accidental witnesses to civilizations they never meant to study. Their finds may be modest: a shoe, a tile, a coin, a piece of painted plaster, a carved stone reused upside down. But each object interrupts the assumption that history lives only in museums, ruins, and books. The rise of professional archaeology changes the relationship between city and ground. Rescue archaeology, also called salvage archaeology, in some places develops because modern construction will not stop forever, but the past cannot simply be ignored. Archaeologists are called to record, excavate, photograph, map, sample, and interpret before the new building proceeds. This creates a tense partnership. The developer wants foundations, the archaeologist wants time, the engineer wants stability, the historian wants context. The public may want both heritage and housing, both memory and transit, both preservation and the conveniences that require digging in the first place. No single solution fully accounts for this tension, because cities are living places, not sealed monuments. When archaeology works well in the modern city, it reveals not only the oldest or most spectacular layer, but the entire sequence of urban life. The ancient wall matters, but so does the medieval pit cut through it, the early modern drain beside it, the industrial cellar above it, and the modern service line that almost destroyed it. The city's story is not a competition in which the deepest layer automatically wins. Each layer shows a different human solution to the same basic problem of inhabiting limited ground. The forgotten civilization is central, but it is part of a longer pattern of building, forgetting, reusing, and rediscovering. Modern technology has made these buried worlds more visible without always touching them. Ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, magnetometry, laser scanning, photogrammetry, three-dimensional modeling soil, chemistry, microscopic residue analysis, ancient DNA, where preservation allows isotope studies and careful environmental sampling all add detail to the record. These tools do not create certainty by themselves. They require interpretation, and interpretation remains human. But they allow archaeologists to detect walls beneath squares, map old streets under open ground, reconstruct harbour edges, identify diet and migration patterns, and understand how ancient environments changed as cities grew over them. Still, there is humility in every trench. A modern excavation may open only a narrow window, sometimes no wider than the space needed for a pipe or foundation. From that window, scholars must reconstruct entire neighbourhoods with caution. A wall may belong to a house, shop, bath, warehouse, or boundary. A pit may be storage, refuse, ritual deposit, or later disturbance. A layer of rubble may mean destruction, renovation, or levelling. Popular imagination often wants the buried city to speak clearly and dramatically, but urban archaeology is often a science of partial sentences. What survives in the record suggests patterns, not perfect stories. Above the excavation fences, modern life continues with almost comic indifference. People complain about detours, buses change routes, coffee shops lose foot traffic, office workers glance down from windows, news cameras appear if the find is dramatic enough. Then the city absorbs the interruption. Sometimes the remains are removed to museums, sometimes they are documented and reburied for protection. Sometimes glass floors are installed so pedestrians can look down into the older world. Sometimes the find vanishes again beneath a new building recorded in archives but invisible to passers-by. This is the modern paradox. The city discovers its buried civilization at the very moment it is most capable of destroying it. It has tools to read the ground more carefully than ever before, and machines powerful enough to erase centuries in an afternoon. It can celebrate ancient fragments as heritage, then build above them with concrete piles. It can make the past famous and inaccessible at the same time. The forgotten civilization under modern streets survives because it is buried, but it is known because modern streets keep cutting into it. Every discovery is both recovery and wound. By now the old city is no longer just underfoot. It has entered public imagination as a hidden double of the modern one. The street is no longer a simple route from one corner to another. It becomes a lid, a mask, a surface stretched over older crossings, older drains, older fires, older markets, and older dead. The modern citizen may still hurry across it without thinking, but the illusion has cracked. Beneath the city of schedules and steel lies another city of stone ash, waterbone and memory waiting for the next trench to open. When archaeologists descend into the modern trench, they enter a place that is neither fully past nor fully present. Above them, the city continues to operate with impatient energy. Buses pass, shops open, water pipes hum inside the walls of nearby buildings. Pedestrians lean over barriers for a moment, curious but hurried. Below, the archaeologists stand in a cut through time, surrounded by soil faces that show the city not as a map, but as a vertical memory asphalt. Concrete, brick, rubble, ash, tile, clay, and the dark stains of human occupation. Their task is not simply to find old things. It is to understand how those things came to rest where they are, and what kind of life once made them ordinary. The first work is often slower than imagination expects. There is no dramatic sweeping away of earth to reveal an instant lost city. Excavation proceeds through recording, measuring, cleaning, drawing, photographing, sampling, labeling, and waiting for patterns to emerge. A trowel scrapes carefully across compacted soil. A brush clears the edge of a stone. A total station or laser scanner records exact position. Bags fill with pottery sherds, bone fragments, seeds, charcoal metal, scraps, plaster, glass, tile, and soil samples. Every object matters less as a treasure than as evidence. A coin without context is interesting. A coin sealed beneath a floor beside a drain within a layer of ash, or inside a repaired wall, becomes part of a story. In urban archaeology, context is everything because the city has already disturbed itself for centuries. A broken pot lying beside an ancient street may have been dropped there during daily use, swept there as rubbish, washed there by a flood, or redeposited by later builders digging through older layers. A human bone in a construction trench may belong to a formal cemetery, a disturbed burial, a disaster layer, a charnel deposit or soil moved from elsewhere. The evidence remains incomplete until relationships are established. Which layer covers which wall cuts through which floor, which drain belongs to which street, which pit is later than the building it interrupts. The archaeologist reads not only objects but the order of disturbances. Pottery is one of the great clocks of buried cities. It breaks easily, survives well, and changes through time in shape, fabric, decoration, firing, and production technique. A sherd from a cooking pot can be more useful than a golden ornament if it helps date a layer or identify a trade connection. Fine tableware may reveal fashion and wealth. Coarse storage vessels may reveal food systems, transport, and household scale. Amphora fragments can show imported oil, wine, fish products, or other goods moving through the city. Yet pottery is not always simple. Old vessels can be reused. Sherds can be mixed into fill. Local workshops can copy foreign styles. Scholars still debate many ceramic sequences, especially where excavation records from earlier periods are poor. The clay speaks clearly only when its context is preserved. Bones add another kind of testimony. Animal bones reveal diet trade, butchery, ritual craft, and environment. A concentration of cattle bones may point to large-scale slaughter or provisioning. Fish bones may show river use, coastal trade, or changing food habits. Bird bones, shellfish, and small mammals can reveal status or local ecology. Human bones treated with care and respect reveal age, sex, where determinable disease, injury, diet, migration, and sometimes the violence or hardship of urban life. Isotope analysis may show whether someone grew up locally or arrived from another region. Ancient DNA, where preservation and ethical rules allow, can illuminate ancestry, kinship disease, and population change. But bones never tell the whole person. They offer biological traces of lives that also contained names, choices, memories, and relationships now mostly beyond reach. Inscriptions and graffiti can feel like sudden voices in the ground. A name scratched on a wall, a maker's stamp on a tile, a tally mark on a pot, a brief dedication, a curse, a label, a merchant's mark, a funerary text, or an official inscription can narrow the distance between modern observer and ancient inhabitant. But writing is unevenly preserved and socially unequal. Literate groups leave more direct traces than those who lived through oral agreements, memory labour, and unrecorded skill. Official texts often preserve what authorities wanted remembered. Graffiti may preserve irritation, humour, devotion, ownership, counting, or boredom, but usually in fragments. What survives in the record suggests presence, not full biography. Mosaics and painted plaster reveal the city's surfaces before burial stripped them of colour. Modern visitors often see ancient ruins as stone-coloured and bare, but many urban interiors were vivid. Walls could be painted red, yellow, black, blue, green, or white, depending on region, wealth, and fashion. Floors might show geometric patterns, animals, plants, mythological scenes, marine imagery, or simple, practical surfaces. A fragment of painted plaster under a modern building can prove that a room once performed status taste or sacred meaning. Yet decoration also moves through fashion. A design copied in one city may be adapted in another. A fine mosaic may belong to a wealthy house, Bath public hall, or religious structure. Interpretation requires the room, the neighbourhood, and the layer. Sometimes the most powerful evidence comes from drains and latrines. These are not elegant finds, but they preserve the city with ruthless honesty. Seeds, fruit stones, fish, scales, eggshells, parasite eggs, plant fibres, insects' pollen, and food residues can survive in damp deposits. They reveal what people consumed, what passed through the market, what grew nearby, which parasites infected bodies, and how sanitation actually functioned. A latrine can expose the gap between public pride and private biology. A city with monuments of stone still depends on bodies that eat, digest, sicken, and dispose. No single explanation fully accounts for health and diet from such deposits alone, but they often reveal daily life more vividly than official architecture. Workers in the trench also follow features that are not objects at all. A line of darker soil may mark a ditch, a circular stain may indicate a post hole, a compacted band may be an old walking surface. A robber trench may show where a wall was removed in antiquity or the medieval period. A layer of crushed plaster may be a collapsed ceiling. Tiny charcoal flecks may mark burning too slight to form a dramatic destruction layer. Urban archaeology often depends on noticing differences that disappear once exposed to weather. The lost city is sometimes visible for only a short time as colour, texture, and moisture reveal shapes that must be recorded before they fade. This is why excavation is also destruction. To uncover a layer, archaeologists often remove the layer above it. Even careful excavation cannot put the ground back exactly as it was. The ethical burden is heavy: record enough, sample enough, understand enough before moving deeper. In a modern construction site, pressure can be intense. There may be deadlines, budgets, safety concerns, traffic disruptions, legal limits, and political attention. The archaeologist must decide what can be preserved in place, what must be lifted, what can be sampled, and what must be recorded and lost. The public sometimes imagines archaeology as discovery alone. In a living city it is also triage. Yet when the work succeeds, the buried civilization gains depth beyond spectacle. A wall becomes a house becomes a neighbourhood becomes part of a city tied to trade, water, labour ritual, inequality crisis, and memory. The trench links the earlier sections of the story in material form, the first settlement beside water, the hardening of streets, the lives of workers and families, the engine of commerce, the public buildings, the signs of strain, the turning point, the burial, the reuse, and the modern rediscovery. Each layer complicates the one above it. Each fragment resists being forced into a single neat legend. At the end of the day, the trench is covered or locked. Tools are cleaned, finds are boxed, notes are checked, samples leave for laboratories. The modern street remains fenced, impatient, half open to the sky. Beneath the temporary lights, the ancient stones seem quiet again. But the silence has changed. They're no longer merely obstacles under construction. They have been measured back into history. The forgotten civilization is still incomplete, still broken, still partly hidden beneath foundations that may never be removed. But it has answered in the only way buried cities can answer, through the position of a wall, the stain of a fire, the curve of a drain, the worn edge of a bowl, and the stubborn survival of things once too ordinary to notice. The most revealing clues beneath modern streets are often not the ones that first attract attention. A mosaic catches the eye. A carved stone appears on camera. A skeleton stops work with the gravity of human remains. A statue, fragment, coin hoard inscription, or painted wall can make the buried city feel suddenly dramatic. Yet the deeper story usually lives in quieter evidence: a repaired cooking pot, a blocked drain, a child's bead, a butchered bone, a patch in a floor, a layer of soot on plaster. A cheap lamp used until its surface blackened, a shoe worn thin at the heel. A wall rebuilt slightly out of line because the builder was working round damage no longer visible. These clues refuse silence because they resist simple stories. They show that the buried civilization was not only founded, flourished, struck by crisis and forgotten. It adjusted, it improvised, it carried on through inconvenience, inequality, shortage and change. Under a modern office tower, archaeologists may find a house whose first phase was spacious and carefully built, then a later phase where rooms were divided into smaller units, drains were poorly repaired, and storage jars were set into floors that had once been decorative. That sequence may suggest decline, overcrowding, changing ownership, economic pressure, or a shift in how the building was used. The evidence remains incomplete, but the alteration itself matters. The city did not simply vanish, it transformed room by room. Household objects are especially stubborn witnesses. A pot with a mended crack shows that replacement was not always easy or necessary. A lamp found near a threshold suggests the daily management of darkness. A spindle whirl or loom weight points toward textile production that may have taken place inside domestic space where labour and household life were inseparable. Gaming pieces may reveal leisure in cramped conditions. Cosmetic containers, combs, pins, beads, and personal ornaments suggest the care of appearance across levels of society, not only among elites. Keys, locks, and door fittings reveal anxieties about property privacy and access. These are small things, but in a city they form the grammar of ordinary survival. Repairs are among the most important clues because they show expectation. A repaired wall means someone believes the building is worth keeping. A patched drain means the system still matters. A resurfaced street means movement remains important enough to organize. A replaced threshold means traffic continues. Even crude repairs carry meaning. They may show poverty or urgency, but they also show refusal. A community under strain keeps making arrangements with the future. When those repairs become less careful, when materials become more scavenged, when public systems are maintained unevenly, or not at all, the city's confidence leaves marks as visible as any inscription. Food remains complicate the story further. In one layer, imported fish products, Fine tableware wine containers or exotic plant remains may suggest a city deeply tied to long-distance exchange. In later layers, the pattern may shift toward local substitutes, fewer imports, coarser vessels, or evidence of restricted diet. But interpretation must be careful. A household's waste does not represent an entire city. Imported goods can disappear from one neighborhood while continuing elsewhere. A change in pottery may reflect fashion or supply rather than hardship. Scholars still debate many such patterns because economic life is uneven. Still, when food remains, container types, coin finds, and building repairs all point in the same direction, the ground begins to reveal pressure that no official monument admits. Burial patterns can be even more difficult and more intimate. A carefully planned cemetery outside a city wall suggests a society maintaining boundaries between the living and the dead. But later burials inside former houses, workshops, roads, or public spaces may suggest changing customs, shrinking population insecurity, religious transformation, emergency, or simple reuse of abandoned land. Mass graves may point to epidemic violence, famine, or disaster, though none of these should be assumed too quickly. Human remains must be treated with caution and dignity, not as props for dramatic collapse. What survives in the record suggests that death often reveals the city's deepest changes: who is honored, who is neglected, who is moved, who is forgotten, and where the living can still afford to make space for grief. Graffiti and informal marks offer another kind of resistance. Official inscriptions speak in the voice of power, but scratched walls and marked objects can preserve ordinary presence. Names, numbers, symbols, rough images, game boards, ownership marks, tally marks, devotional signs, and insults may appear in places never meant for official memory. Some are too brief to interpret securely. Others hint at literacy, identity work, worship, humor, boredom, or complaint. They remind the excavator that the buried civilization was not a mute population, organized only by rulers and buildings. It was full of people marking surfaces because humans have always had an impulse to leave a trace, however small. Damage layers are among the most dramatic clues, but they are also among the most dangerous to overread. A band of ash can invite a story of invasion. Broken statues can suggest religious conflict. Buried valuables can imply panic. Skeletons in unusual positions can look like a final disaster. Sometimes these interpretations are correct. Sometimes they are partly correct. Sometimes they are wrong. A statue may be broken for reuse rather than hatred. A hoard may be ritual savings, theft, or emergency concealment. A burned layer may come from accident, industrial activity, demolition, or war. No single explanation fully accounts for these traces without context. The ground is honest, but not simple. Workshops reveal how the city changes economically. A former elite house may become a place for metalworking, bone carving, dyeing, weaving, or storage. A public building may be divided into small production spaces. Waste from craft activity may appear where earlier layers show domestic comfort or civic display. This can look like decline, but it can also show adaptation to new markets and new realities. A city that loses one form of status may become useful in another way. The buried record often challenges the neat idea that civilization ends when monuments lose their original purpose. Sometimes the grand building dies, but work continues in its ruins. Water systems tell a similarly complex story. A blocked drain may indicate neglect, but it may also show that a street's use has changed. A well filled with rubbish might mean abandonment, contamination, or deliberate closure. A cistern, repaired with poorer materials, may suggest reduced resources, but also continued technical knowledge. Flood silt inside a street may reveal environmental stress, but people may have cleaned and rebuilt afterward. The city's relationship with water is never finished. From the first settlement near a river to the modern drainage grate above the excavation, water keeps testing human order. In the buried layers, every channel is both engineering and confession. One lesser-known clue lies in insects' pollen, parasites, and microscopic remains. These tiny traces can reconstruct environments that buildings alone cannot show. They may reveal damp conditions, stored grain, pests, waste accumulation, livestock presence, imported plants changing diets or disease burdens. A grand avenue tells one story about civic planning. A parasite egg in a latrine tells another story about bodies living inside that plan. The contrast is essential. Civilizations are not made only from the ideals they carve into stone. They are also made from digestion, infection, dust, rot weeds, vermin, and the constant labor of keeping disorder at bay. Together, these clues create a city that refuses to become a simple legend. It was not merely glorious. It was not merely doomed. It was not buried in one clean catastrophe, nor preserved like a museum sealed under the street. It was lived in, strained, repaired, reused, damaged, remembered, misremembered, and finally covered by other lives. The fragments beneath modern pavement do not answer every question, but they make certain easy answers impossible. They show a civilization too human to fit neatly into rise and fall. It left behind contradictions, wealth beside hardship planning, beside improvisation, sacred space beside trash, public pride beside private illness, destruction beside reuse, forgetting beside survival. This is why a trench under an ordinary street can feel more powerful than an isolated ruin. It holds not only what the city wanted to show, but what it could not help leaving. The worn bowl, the blocked drain, the repaired wall, the hurried burial, the reused column, the charred beam, the child's bead, the market weight, the food seeds, the scratched mark on plaster, each refuses silence in its own small way. None tells the whole story. Together they make the buried civilization speak in fragments, and fragments are often the most honest language history has left. By the time the evidence has been gathered, cleaned, counted, mapped, and compared, the hardest question remains. Why did the civilization vanish from common memory when so much of it stayed physically present beneath the streets? The answer is not a single locked door waiting for one perfect key. It is a cluster of explanations, each convincing in part, each incomplete alone. The buried city disappeared because it was damaged, reused, renamed, built over, misunderstood, and slowly folded into later life. It disappeared because people forgot it, but also because people kept using it. Forgetting was not the opposite of survival. In this case, forgetting was one of the ways survival happened. One explanation begins with catastrophe. Fire, flood, earthquake, invasion, plague, famine, or political violence may create the break after which the old order never fully returns. Archaeologists may find ash across a neighborhood, collapsed walls, flood silt in rooms, hurried burials, hidden coin hoards, or sudden changes in material culture. These traces are powerful because they seem to mark a before and an after. A city burns, and the next layer is different. A flood covers a district, and later streets rise above it. A conquest breaks public authority, and old buildings are stripped or converted. Catastrophe can certainly bury memory, especially when survivors scatter, records are destroyed, and institutions collapse. Yet catastrophe alone rarely explains the whole disappearance. Many cities suffer disasters and continue. People rebuild after fires. They return after floods. They repair after earthquakes. They live under new rulers. They adapt to disease and loss because the alternative is often worse. A destruction layer may mark trauma, but not necessarily abandonment. Scholars still debate many supposed final catastrophes, because dramatic endings are easier to narrate than long transformation. The evidence remains incomplete, and the ground often shows rebuilding above damage. The civilization may have survived its disaster physically, only to lose its old identity gradually. A second explanation is political replacement. When a new empire, kingdom, religion, administration, or ruling elite takes control, it may reshape the city's public memory. Names change, official languages change, sacred buildings are closed, converted, or reinterpreted. Old symbols are removed, buried, reused, or deliberately ignored. A public square may remain active, but its ceremonies change. A temple may become a church, mosque, palace, warehouse, or quarry. A government building may be partitioned for other uses. The old civilization does not vanish because every stone is destroyed. It vanishes because the meanings attached to those stones are replaced. This kind of disappearance can be subtle. Ordinary people may continue living in the same neighborhoods, drawing water from the same wells, walking the same roads, and using the same foundations. From the ground's perspective, there is continuity. From memory's perspective, there is rupture. A later generation may know that the walls are ancient, but not who built them or why. A place name may preserve a faint echo, but the story behind it fades. A carved stone may be admired for beauty while its inscription goes unread. What survives in the record suggests that political replacement often turns a civilization from ancestor into material. A third explanation is economic decline. Trade routes shift, harbours silt up, roads become unsafe, tax systems weaken or become more burdensome, fields fail, workshops lose access to materials, elite spending declines, public maintenance becomes irregular, imports grow rare, local substitutes appear, houses are subdivided, grand buildings are reused for storage, craft production, or cheap housing. This explanation is less dramatic than fire or invasion, but it may be more common. A city built on movement can lose itself when movement changes direction. Once goods money, people and authority stop flowing through old channels, the city's public identity begins to shrink. Economic explanations, however, must also be handled carefully. A reduction in imported goods in one excavation area may reflect local poverty, changing tastes, new trade partners, or preservation bias. A workshop inside an old public building may suggest decline, but it may also show flexibility. A city can become less monumental and still remain alive. No single explanation fully accounts for the economic signals beneath modern streets. They are strongest when several kinds of evidence align: fewer imports, poorer repairs, reduced public maintenance, shifts in diet coin shortages, abandonment of certain districts, and changes in burial practice. Even then, the story is usually not simple collapse, but reorganization. A fourth explanation is environmental change. Rivers shift, harbors become unusable, marshes expand, floods become more frequent, drought weakens agriculture, forests disappear from overuse, soil fertility declines, earthquakes damage infrastructure, coastlines move. In the earliest layers, the settlement grew because the landscape offered advantages. In later layers, the same landscape may begin to withdraw them. A river that once brought trade may deposit silt until docks become stranded. Low ground that once supported warehouses may become too wet. A water system that once displayed civic mastery may become impossible to maintain. The city's geography, which first made it powerful, can slowly make it vulnerable. Still, environmental stress rarely acts alone. Ancient people were observant and adaptive. They dredged, drained, terraced, repaired, redirected, stored, migrated, and changed crops when they could. Environmental pressure becomes decisive when it meets political weakness, economic strain, disease, or social unrest. A flood after a prosperous decade may be repaired. A flood after war tax collapse and labour shortage may become permanent transformation. This is why the buried city's disappearance feels less like a single cause and more like a failure of resilience. The same blow that one generation could absorb becomes irreversible for another. A fifth explanation is memory itself. Civilizations are not remembered automatically. They require institutions that preserve names, texts, rituals, genealogies, monuments, and stories. If those institutions break, memory thins quickly. Archives burn, decay, or become unreadable. Languages change. Scripts fall out of use. Priests, scribes, officials, and families who carried tradition vanish, migrate, or adapt to new powers. Later inhabitants may live among ancient stones without access to the old explanations. They create new stories because the human mind dislikes unexplained remains. Ruins become the work of giants, saints, devils, foreign kings, lost races, or legendary founders. Some of these stories preserve faint truths. Many reshape the past beyond recognition. This is where unsupported popular theories often enter. A buried city seems mysterious, so some imagine secret technologies vanished, super civilizations, hidden tunnels linking continents, or sudden world-ending events unsupported by evidence. Such ideas can be seductive because they offer clean wonder, but the real evidence points to something more human and more complex. The city was buried by construction disaster, waste repair, reuse, water politics, economy, faith, and time. Its disappearance does not require impossible machines or lost global empires. The mystery is not that ancient people had magic. The mystery is that ordinary human continuity can erase an entire world while preserving its stones underfoot. The strongest explanation then is layered causation. The civilization under modern streets vanished through accumulation. A disaster damaged it. A new power renamed it. Trade shifted. Public buildings lost their original roles. Water systems failed or changed. Later builders reused its materials. Medieval inhabitants converted its spaces. Modern development cut through its remains. Each stage took something and left something. No single generation destroyed the whole memory. No single generation preserved it either. The buried city became invisible because countless practical decisions slowly separated material survival from cultural understanding. That separation is the heart of the problem. A wall can survive after its builders are forgotten. A street can continue guiding movement after its original name disappears. A drain can keep working after the engineering tradition that made it is lost. A column can stand in a later building with no one knowing the god-ruler bath hall or market it once served. Physical survival may even make forgetting easier because useful remains are absorbed into new life rather than set apart as sacred relics of the past. The old civilization becomes normal, and what becomes normal often stops being seen. So the competing stories do not cancel one another. They form the only explanation wide enough for the evidence. The forgotten civilization was not buried under modern streets because history ended. It was buried because history continued. People survived, rebuilt, converted, quarried, paved, dug, filled, renamed, prayed, traded, and hurried onward. The city lost its visible identity, not in one silence but in thousands of ordinary noises. Hammers on reused stone carts on raised roads, water in patched drains, prayers in converted buildings, shovels filling old rooms, machines cutting new foundations. Beneath them all, the old world remained not alive, not entirely dead, waiting for a future city to break the surface and ask what had been forgotten. The civilization beneath the modern street does not survive as a single visible ruin. It survives as a pressure, a shape, a resistance in the ground. Its old walls may be broken, its public buildings dismantled, its language lost or altered beyond recognition, Its markets silenced its gods, replaced its dead disturbed by later foundations, its streets sealed beneath asphalt and concrete. Yet it remains present in ways that are harder to erase than monuments. A road still bends where an ancient boundary once stood. A square still gathers people where an older open space gathered them before. A church, mosque, palace, station, apartment block or office tower rests on foundations laid by hands that never imagined the skyline above them. The modern city thinks it is walking forward, but part of its movement is guided by buried decisions. This is the final irony of the forgotten civilization under modern streets. It is forgotten most completely where it has been most absorbed. A ruined city and an empty landscape can become famous because it stands apart from daily life. Its broken columns and fallen walls announce themselves as the past. But a buried city under a living one is hidden by usefulness. Its stones become foundations. Its street lines become habits. Its drains become obstacles for engineers. Its fragments enter museum cases, basements, subway displays, archives, and tourist routes, while most of its mass remains unseen beneath people buying coffee, waiting for buses, carrying groceries, and checking the time. The old civilization is everywhere, but rarely in a form that demands attention. Place names sometimes preserve faint signals. A district called after an old gate may remember a wall that no longer rises. A street name for a market may follow the edge of trade older than the current buildings. A neighborhood associated with baths, wells, towers, stones, or fields may hold a clue to vanished structures or landscapes. These names can be fragile evidence. They change, migrate, and gather later meanings. Scholars still debate many place name origins because language is as layered as soil. Yet even when uncertain names remind us that cities remember through speech as well as stone, a word spoken casually by commuters may carry the ghost of a feature buried beneath their root. Street patterns are often more durable than official memory. A straight line through a city may follow a Roman road, an imperial avenue, a medieval processional route, or a track older than written history. A curved property boundary may trace an amphitheatre, a defensive ditch, a vanished shoreline, or an old sacred enclosure. Modern planners may widen, rename, pave, and regulate these routes, but inherited movement is stubborn. People keep using certain corridors because each generation builds services, markets, homes, and expectations along them. What survives in the record suggests that the buried civilization can continue shaping daily behavior without anyone consciously remembering why. Reused materials offer another kind of survival. A carved stone set into a wall may have once belonged to a temple, bathhouse, tomb palace, or civic monument. A column in a later building may have crossed centuries of religious and political change before becoming decorative support. Bricks stamped by ancient makers may be hidden behind plaster. A foundation block may carry chisel marks from a workshop long gone. These objects are displaced but not mute. They show that later societies did not simply inherit empty ground. They inherited a material vocabulary. They spoke with stones already shaped by others. Museums and archaeological parks make parts of the buried city visible, but they also simplify it. A glass floor over a mosaic, a preserved wall inside a metro station, a display case of pottery, a reconstructed street section, or a sign marking an old gate can help the public understand that another city lies beneath the visible one. Yet these fragments are curated islands in a much larger hidden landscape. They may suggest completeness where there is only survival by chance. The evidence remains incomplete. The most important parts of the buried city may still lie under active streets, private buildings, railway lines, protected foundations, or places too difficult and expensive to excavate. Much of the civilization remains known only by inference old records, construction reports, and the occasional opening in the ground. Even this incompleteness is part of the legacy. It forces a different kind of historical imagination, one based not on fantasy, but on careful restraint. The buried city cannot be restored entirely. No excavation can recover every voice in the market, every prayer in the shrine, every decision made at a doorway, every fear during a flood, every calculation by a merchant, every tired gesture of a worker repairing a wall for one more season. Archaeology can recover patterns, materials, injuries, diets, trade structures, and sometimes names. It can narrow uncertainty. It can test stories against soil, but it cannot give back the whole vanished world. No single explanation fully accounts for the life of a city, because cities are made from too many lives moving at once. Still, the traces are enough to change the way the modern street feels. The pavement becomes less flat. The drain no longer seems only modern. The curve of a road becomes suspicious. The basement wall becomes a question. The construction fence becomes a threshold between ordinary time and deep time. Beneath the sound of engines and footsteps, one can imagine older wheels on stone sandals on packed earth, water in channels, hammers in workshops, smoke rising from courtyards, traders unloading goods by a vanished waterfront, and voices gathering in a square whose surface now lies meters below the current city. The civilization underfoot survives because it was never completely separate from what came after. It became the ground of later history. It fed medieval walls, supported modern streets, shaped property lines, complicated engineering plans, enriched museums, inspired arguments among scholars, and reminded cities that their present is not the first claim on the land. Its disappearance is therefore not total. It is partial, uneven, and strangely intimate. The old city has lost its face, but not all its influence. It has lost its public memory, but not every mark of its existence. And perhaps that is the most unsettling legacy. Modern people often imagine that their own cities are permanent because they are mapped, photographed, wired, recorded, and named in countless systems. Yet the buried civilization was also certain of itself in its own way. Its streets were real, its laws mattered, its markets opened, its public buildings carried authority, its people knew the routes, smells, dangers, and promises of their world. Then time passed. Surfaces rose, meanings changed, and another city walked above them. The modern street is not an ending. It is only the newest layer already beginning to leave traces for someone else to misread, preserve, or forget. Word count 1072. Final wind down. At the end, the street closes again. The trench is covered. The barriers are removed. The traffic returns to its usual rhythm and the city resumes the performance of being whole. People cross the pavement without looking down. Rainwater moves toward the drains. Lights come on in windows. Somewhere below, the older walls return to darkness, carrying the weight of everything built above them. The forgotten civilization remains there not as a ghost, but as matter. Stone ash, clay, bone mortar, tile, silt, wood, metal, and dust. It does not need to be seen to continue shaping the place. It waits inside foundations, under sidewalks, behind basement walls, beneath stations, below courtyards, and under streets where the living world is too busy to remember that it is standing on another one. This is the quiet lesson of buried cities. Civilizations do not vanish only when their buildings fall. They vanish when their meanings no longer travel with their stones. A road can survive after its name is lost. A wall can support a house after its builders are forgotten. A sacred place can become another sacred place, then a market, then a cellar, then an archaeological report. Nothing remains exactly itself, yet nothing disappears completely. The modern city is full of confidence, as every living city must be. It builds, repairs, demolishes, widens, deepens, and rises. It speaks in schedules, permits maps and names. But under that confidence lies a slower truth. Every surface is temporary. Every street is a future layer. Every foundation presses down on older choices and begins almost at once to become part of the hidden ground. Far below the passing feet, the first road may still be there, worn smooth by people who never saw the towers above them. A broken bowl may still rest beside a drain. A wall may still follow the line of a room where someone once slept, worked worried, and hoped for another morning. The city above moves on, but the city below keeps its patient silence, holding the memory of lives that did not mean to become mysterious. And in that silence, the past does not rise dramatically. It simply remains under the street, under the light, under the ordinary day, waiting in the dark architecture of time.